right, welcome everybody to the 4 p.m. work session, joint work session with the RDA, Municipal, and the NBA. Looks like all council members are present with the exception of Council Member Blair, who I believe will be joining us shortly.
I be.
Bart, yes. So we'll go ahead and I don't know if there are any calendar agenda things that we've got. Nothing. And speak of the council member. There he is.
Okay.
All righty. So let's go ahead with the review. We have 2 meetings tonight with the redevelopment agency at 6 p.m. We will have a report from administration on the proposed fiscal year 2024-2025 budget, which we are adopting or accepting for review, right? And setting a public hearing. Okay. And then public comments, that'll be the time in the evening. If anybody wants to make public comments on any item, that'll be at that point. And then after we adjourn, we'll go into the special MBA meeting. And we have some minutes for approval. Trustee Graff, you've got those looked at? Okay, perfect. And then we'll have also the proposed fiscal year 2024-2025 budget to accept for review and set a public hearing on that item. Those are the 2 meetings. Any discussion on those? All looks pretty straightforward.
I have a question, and I don't know if you already said this, so I apologize. I was talking apart. Are we doing any acknowledgements for Asian Pacific Islander Month?
I am not aware of that.
The Diversity Commission hasn't contacted us about any.
I'm sorry, I would say so.
Okay. All right. We have a little bit of a full agenda here, and we anticipate after the MBA coming back in here for the remainder of the work session to hear Brad Philpott and Lisa talk about the water rate amendments. So to start off, we'll invite.
So
go ahead.
Does it make sense to have Gabe talk before?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you get here at 4.
3:59 and 59 seconds. Yeah. Okay, we'll invite Justin Sorensen up to the front here to talk to us about the proposed MBA fiscal year budget that we're going to be considering later.
Thank you, Chair. To be able to be here, I just want to forewarn you that this will be you'll get a double dose of this presentation tonight. I just figured it was easy enough with the Municipal Building Authority to have one set of slides that we'll go through. So for your consideration tonight will be to accept the review and set the public hearing for the fiscal year 24 to 25 budget for the Municipal Building Authority. In the past, just as kind of for those new council members, or I guess new trustees, we've used this fund in the past for facilities. We've used it for the debt to be able to do the public works building and also for the Wentworth Stadium, things done at Wentworth Stadium. We haven't had any debt in this fund for the last 3 years. So we now have the Wonder Block parking structure debt and construction in this fund. And so we did a budget opening recently to recognize the proceeds, the bond proceeds for those parking structures in the amount of $60,129,000. I included a picture of what one of the parking structures will look like, as well as I got this picture today from engineering on feet on the ground of how it's looking over there. So just as a reminder of what this work to be able to for city-owned facilities.
Orient us a little bit there, Justin, can you? What's in the foreground on the right? Is that the new?
That's the ice cream building.
That's brown ice cream? Okay.
Yeah. So that's looking, yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So for your consideration tonight, the budget for next year, we are increasing that budget by 3.6 million. And what that is for the debt payments related to the bonds for next year. A majority of that is for the MBA lease revenue bonds. I can't remember the exact dollar amount, but That portion of the payment is through, we did part of the bonding, we did capitalized interest, and so we're adding that to our budget to recognize that. And then the other portion is going to be lease proceeds coming in from when we discuss the city budget, the new parking and mobility fund, where we will have a payment out that will come into the NBA that will cover, as part of the bonding, there was the RDA sales tax. There's a small portion that we put into the NBA for $5 million. And so we're recognizing that portion of the debt payment in the NBA as well. So that debt payment is split between the RDA and the NBA. So that is the proposal for you. Do you have any questions on the municipal and debt, or not debt, budget?
Justin, can you explain, so we just did budget opening for $60 million, that obviously doesn't show up in the budget, so how does that, what's gonna happen to that money?
It's a great question. So similar like we do with our capital improvement projects, at the end of the fiscal year, whatever funds are not spent, which a majority of that will not have been spent yet, when we do our carry forward next year, once our audit is complete, we will carry forward the remaining funds for the structures that have been spent. So, and we'll send that information to council staff to be able to provide to your fleet. So.
Yeah, just clarity on my part. You said there's no debt in that fund yet. And so for me, in my mind, I'm just trying to wrap my thoughts around the Marshall White Center. So that really hasn't begun yet to require a payment.
So the Marshall White, we funded through a different type of bond, and those ones we're accounting for in the general fund.
Okay.
And so we'll talk about that when we talk about the general fund revenues. But the bonding for the Marshall White Center, we did. It was a different type of bond.
I've seen that before. I'm just trying to allocate where that. And then the other question I have is, as you look forward and we project, probably not next year, but in the future, with all the development around Union Station, where does that fall in the budget?
This may be a question for Lisa or Mara, but I know there's still a lot in the works with that. But right now, I believe in the future that is a potential redevelopment area, and so part of that would be done as an RDA with whatever ends up getting from that.
All right, welcome up, Lisa, if you don't mind. And just a reminder for anyone listening online, we don't have microphones in front of us. We have microphones in the sky, so we're all going to speak with nice, loud, clear voices.
So talk loud. Currently in Union Station, there's a budget for pre-development costs for studies of $700,000. I'm not sure how much of that has been spent. CED hasn't asked for additional budget this coming year, but we do anticipate that there will be additional requests for Union Station.
And where does that fall into the budget? What?
In the RDA.
RDA?
Yep, the RDA.
We don't have an area set up yet for Union Station, so we put it in the closest one, which is Kiesel. So that's where we're accounting for those funds right now. Okay. RDA area.
And just for my understanding, again, the anticipation that the city has for payment on those, where does that money come from? Will that
It's coming from BDO lease
be
revenue.
lease revenue?
Yeah, it's $780,000 a year over the next 7 years. So we will just budget that every year. We do have a BDO lease revenue ordinance we'd like to update, and that Union Station payment will be included as part of that ordinance.
And so the funding that comes in for Marshall White Center and also for Wonder Block and then also Union Station, a lot of that will be associated with the lease revenue that comes in from BDO, primarily pretty much all of it, correct? Okay.
We'll review that. It's another item tonight to talk about.
Okay.
Video lease revenue.
I think for the Wonder Blocks, parking fees will also be revenue source for that. For the parking there
Correct.
as
So
well.
the plan is once our parking system is up and running and we're able to collect fees, we're creating a parking and mobility fund under the city that will collect those fees, and then we will do a lease payment out of that fund to the MBA for that debt payment on the MBA portion.
Can you repeat that again? I didn't quite
So what the plan would be, once our parking, paid parking plan, once it's up and running and those fees are collected, we created an enterprise fund similar to like we've done for the utilities that will collect those fees. And then we'll program in a lease payment that would go out of that fund and come into the NBA. But obviously that's not going yet, so we don't have those lease payments yet. So the lease payment that I referred to earlier that's coming into the NBA next year is actually a transfer. We transferred money into this new fund next year from BDO lease revenue, and then we will do a payment to the NBA for a portion of the debt payment next year.
Can I ask a question about that statement you just made that the parking program is going to be its own fund, its own, tell me how that all's going to work.
So to track it easy, a better way to track it would be to create its own enterprise fund where it should be a self-sustaining entity. So we'll be able to track the revenues coming in and the expenditures going out, which the majority of that expenditure will be the debt associated with the structures.
So don't we hope that that's going to actually make some money someday?
The goal is,
And
yes,
enterprise funds, they're harder to get the money back out of, aren't they?
as far as,
Well, I mean, my understanding is that an enterprise fund, you want to kind of make it its own self-sustaining entity. So
Right.
if it starts to make money, well, we need to cut our rates or something to keep it from really being a money maker. But we kind of hope it will.
I haven't been in those conversations. I may have to invite Lisa up or Mary up on that one, on the future plan with the.
You won't be here when they have to do
I
it.
know. I know what's the-
That's so far down the road.
Yeah, the intent would be, and this is phase one of a bigger plan. But the intent would be that those revenues would be enough to conduct maintenance and replacement on those parking towers. So, we've had to find money for the junction parking towers to do improvements. The hope is that this enterprise fund will generate enough revenue to provide for those, as well as pay for the employees and the equipment and the software necessary to run the parking system. So doing that in its own enterprise fund, we're able to better evaluate whether or not it's self-sustaining.
Okay.
Does that help? Does that answer
Well,
your
I
question?
think I understand that much of it, but I don't. I mean, if it makes
A ton
a
of
profit, I mean,
So we are able to transfer, the city council, I should say, is able to transfer funds out of an enterprise fund. The state requirement for noticing on enterprise funds is that we notice users. Talking to legal about those transfers, a good example is the medical service fund. We don't have a set of users who pay the same amount every month. So the city council, if that enterprise fund becomes very profitable and builds a huge fund balance and the city council would like to use it for another purpose, they could do a transfer out of that fund.
okay, all right.
Thank you. What's the term of the repayment on those bonds?
I think that's 35 years.
Okay, and if there was a credit balance, so to speak, in that enterprise fund, could we elect to retire a portion of that debt with those?
There are some prepayment penalties, but we could prepay them, put them in an escrow and kind of defease them.
So I think the
Essentially.
9 or
flexibility
10 or
is,
11 years.
yeah, it's like 10 years. The
Mhm.
flexibility isn't until 10 years. So
Yeah.
Okay,
after we've had them for 10, then we can start.
so we could put them in escrow for future pay,
Or
so to
just
speak.
hold them in that fund balance.
Yeah, until such time as we could
For repair.
begin to pay that down
Correct.
Build
Yeah.
another parking,
or build another parking structure,
put up another.
or convert it into housing.
Councilmember Marsh, did you have another question?
I did. So you mentioned the junction parking structure that would use enterprise funds to cover that in the future to do maintenance, potentially.
My hope
Yes.
is that fund will help support those parking structures as well.
So is there any plan in the future that junction parking become paid parking as well, or is that?
There are several agreements at the junction that would have to be unwound through legal. So not immediately, but possibly in the future, there is that opportunity.
Right. Thank you. Perfect. All right. Any trustee business or comments?
Those were all good.
But we all had good comments there, good questions there. So, okay. Up next, we will invite, we have our public safety employee group representatives. And I don't know, do you want to, I think we start on one end and move over. So we have, Alex. Alex, if you want to come up first from Ogden Fire Association, and then we'll have Ann, and then we'll have John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I've met most of you, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Alex Sanders. I represent Ogden's union, Local 552. And our union represents about 90% of the fire department. What do we feel as a union with regard to wages and staffing right now? First, let me say thank you, because in the 10 years that I've worked here, I mean, we've had a tremendous amount of support from all of you and from the mayor. So thank you for that. And we've had a lot of pay raises in that time. The difficulty, of course, is that so is everyone else. So it's hard to keep up, especially with some of those big cities. Salt Lake City, Unified, I don't believe that any of us are under the impression that we'll ever be as paid as much of them. They just have more resources. Now, that being said, we would like to be competitive with cities that are similar size, and typically we're busier than they are. In fact, we are the busiest fire department in the state per firefighter. Just to give you, I've talked about this before when I've met with you before, but just to give you to reiterate, Salt Lake City, they ran about 30,000 calls in a year, and they have over 300 firefighters and 15 stations. We ran 22,000 calls with 5 stations and just over 100 firefighters. So a third of the workforce and 3/4 of the call volume. So per firefighter, the busiest by far. And on top of that, cities like Provo, who run they have 6 fire stations, I believe. So one more fire station, comparable firefighters, they staff their stuff a little bit differently than we do, but they ran about 6,000 calls a year, and they get paid more than we do.
6,000?
Yeah. So we're well and above the typical call volume for a city our size.
So they're paying a lot of firefighters to just sit around?
Well, it's not necessarily sit around. They're definitely staying busy. No.
Or fewer firefighters.
Yeah, no, we have about the similar size firefighters. No, it's the opposite. We're getting paid to run ourselves into the ground. Yeah, they're more typical, I would say, as far as call volume is concerned. And they definitely, on top of that, I mean, I believe you all have had a presentation from Chief Matthew or maybe even Chief Willis with regard to the training that we do, as well as fire prevention things. So we're always involved in those things as well. Our 9 to 5 is certainly not sitting around, I can tell you that.
Oh, not you guys.
Yeah,
No,
neither is theirs. To be honest, no, I know for sure that those all of our departments here in Utah are well trained. Yeah, and now that being said, I have some numbers here that Provo, speaking of, they did a wage study through their union not long ago. They did 16, they evaluated 16 different fire departments. And on most of the bottom steps, we're just below average. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with our pay scale, but essentially, you have firefighter, engineer, captain, chief. And then there's 7 steps within that, meaning every year, if they're doing what they should, they get the step increase. Now on the bottom end, we're just below average, which is good. On the top end, we're typically last place in this study here that they did last year. Now, what this doesn't take into consideration, I will say, is that some cities bolster their numbers by essentially making those steps so wide ranging that they can say this number is really high and nobody ever reaches it. So we do like our steps. We only have 7 steps. That's good. But we would like to maybe just be a little bit more comfortable. We're not asking to be the highest paid. We just don't think that's realistic or, even something that people really desire. People don't get into our business to get paid a million bucks. They just want a good living wage.
Chair, could I ask a question of, you talked about how busy you guys are. And I've wondered this, Chief has never really talked about it, but you guys, roll on multi-jurisdictional stuff a lot, I think, don't you?
Yeah, that's true. I'd say, more often than not, people come here
Oh, okay.
because we're understaffed. And so,
Okay,
there's,
yeah, you answered my question. Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, we do, what's called automatic aid, which means some of those departments have less resources. And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with what NFPA is. That's the National Fire Protection Agency. It's a federal organization that kind of dictates how many firefighters should be on scenes and in trucks and those sorts of things. It's just a guideline. It's not something that cities have to do. So yeah, Roy, for example, they only have 2 fire stations, so they are incapable of getting the amount of firefighters they need at a structure fire. And so we do have automatic aid and we'll go help them. So yeah, that does go into our call volume for sure. But yeah, like I said, I would say every day or close to every day, every one of our ambulances is already on a call. And so they'll have to come into our city for our citizens.
Yeah, that makes sense. I appreciate it. Thank you. That
Yeah.
cleared up a lot.
I was wondering if we could, you would send us that report you were referencing.
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, it's done by Provo, so it's got all their logos on it and the Provo stuff highlighted, but absolutely. I can send it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you separate calls from fire and other, or
It's
fire accident and
in the reporting.
medical?
In the reporting we do, based off of just the numbers that I've shared, no. So 22,000 calls, that includes every type of call. But in then fire reporting, yeah, we have different ways of reporting those. But yeah, that's majority EMS calls.
Yeah.
Yeah, but still a lot of fires, more so than most cities our size. So, and that leads me to the main point that I'm trying to get at. And Chief Matthews doing a tremendous job coming up with funding. He's always getting grants. He's looking to get the SAFER grant, which would increase our staffing by 3. Those people would be fully paid for 3 years. And then this is my understanding, and then the funding drops off. And it would be up to the city to then support those 3 firefighters from then on forward. When I met with Mayor Nadolski a few months ago, I told him that we need probably more like 15 new firefighter positions, which is a tremendous ask, I'm aware. I believe that we're kind of behind the 8 ball with regard to staffing, just because we've been understaffed for so many years. NFPA number 1710, which I referenced earlier, that dictates how many firefighters should be on an engine. I have it pulled up here. It says minimum on duty should be 4, and that's for a low hazard jurisdiction. And as we saw in the previous presentation, that's one example of how our city is no longer a low hazard city. We're getting more and more multifamily dwellings that are coming up, and that increases workload for firefighters and fire departments. A single structure fire, residential single family home, it takes about 16 firefighters to effectively manage that. And that number completely goes out of the window when it becomes a multifamily dwelling with multiple stories. The amount of resources and hands that you need in order to effectively manage that incident is much, much higher. So our city is growing, which is tremendous. But in my opinion, it's important, and the union's opinion, it's important that our fire department reflects that growth, because right now they're already overworked. So Chief Matthew may not agree with me on this point, but my concern mainly is with staffing, more so than pay raises. Of course, I'm never going to turn my nose up at a pay raise, but we need 4 people per fire engine. Well, that would be ideal. Right now we run three people on each fire engine. And as I mentioned, that's what NFPA says is the minimum amount of people you should have on a fire engine. And as I mentioned, Chief Matthews finding ways to make money and do that. As my understanding is, he's also trying to get some one-time fund to put to apparatus, which is great. So he's a wizard when it comes to finding money, and we commend him for that. And we support a lot of the decisions that he makes, but of course, my opinion is that more staffing is what is needed. And that's pretty much all I had. Any questions? Comments?
Yeah, Alex, you've made example of where Roy falls short, we'll pitch in and help. And then you talked about a structure fire that is a multifamily, multi-story. And we might be outnumbered with that. Do we have help from Roy or
Yeah.
North Ogden? Will they come and support us
Yes, yes.
reciprocally like we do that?
Yeah, they do. And
Okay.
on every, we call it stack, which is essentially, you have so many engines and ladder companies that are supposed to come to a structure fire. On every single one, including single family dwellings, we need help from outside agencies as well. So South Ogden comes a lot, Roy comes a lot, depends on where in the city the fire is. Northview comes a lot. So.
Okay. And then is there an exchange of monies for those services? In other words, you know, if we go over there, does Roy City pay us back? And if South Ogden comes to us, do we pay South Ogden for their services, or is this just
I don't think so.
neighborly?
That would be a better question for Chief Matthew, quite frankly. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
I don't deal much with
Is
the money side.
there a formal agreement?
Yeah, there is a formal agreement. I do know that. They call it automatic aid or reciprocal aid,
Okay.
and they do have a
Back to start.
formal agreement, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. And as another frame of reference, the last time we added a fire station, we added two within 2 years of each other. It was in the 60s. And during that time, our call volume was 1/4 of what it is today. And that was station 4 and 5. So we have 5 stations to handle 22,000 calls, which is blowing every other fire department in this state out of the water with regard to call volume per firefighter. And that, in my opinion, the biggest problem that we're having right now as a fire department is retention.
Yeah.
We don't have any problem hiring people because people want to come here to get experience, and then they want to go somewhere else to do less work for more money. And there's a lot of factors probably that would make that happen. And depending on who you ask, they might say that's a generational thing or what have you. But in my opinion, it's in the union's opinion, it's an overload thing. They're getting overworked. And the only way that I know to decrease call volume is to increase firefighters. I will say the thing that Chief Matthew's doing with this interfacility division is huge for us. We totally support that. And if we can get that staffed full time, that would make a world of difference. A lot of times, like when we get a structure fire, so one way that we can kind of fudge the numbers with how many firefighters we get on scene or how many we have on an engine is include those individuals on the ambulance. But I would say it happens almost every fire. That ambulance is first in area, they're somewhere else on an EMS call or transfer when that fire comes in. So now we're relying on outside help in order to handle that. That's the majority of the outside help that we receive is because we're busy already. It's not necessarily because we can't handle it. It's well, I guess that is.
you're up to it, John. You're still overwhelmed.
Yeah, like I said, a couple of years ago, or the last couple of years, we've had some discussions about like the Great Resignation and how there were firefighters not necessarily leaving to other municipalities or other districts, but that they were just leaving the firefighting business altogether.
Yeah.
Is that something that we're still seeing, or is that trend kind of slowing down?
I believe it's slowing down. And Chief Matthew, I know, has a number for that.
Okay.
So he could help you more, I think, with that. But 100%, I think it is slowing. And I think, like I said, there's a lot of factors in the way that the economy works, you know, that a lot of people, just like to try things and then go
Maybe they're
elsewhere.
coming back. Yeah. maybe
Yeah.
Coming back to it now. Yeah.
We've had a lot of people come back. So we've had a lot of people just leave for other fire departments too.
Okay.
I couldn't give you an exact number, but I do
Yeah.
think it is slowing down.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, any other questions? If not, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate your work. Yeah. Next up, we have Ann Stillman, who is the president of the Ogden Lease Benefit Association. Welcome, Ann. And introduce your.
This is my secretary, Sandra Blastus.
All right.
I invited the rest of my board for just show of support, but everybody has other work obligations and it's kind of a hectic week trying to get people all on the same timeline. So the mics pick me up better. I am Detective Stellman with Ogden City Police Department. I am currently the president of the Ogden Police Benefit Association. Want to thank you guys for the invite to come here, kind of speak candidly. I think Alex put it really well, like the past raises and the support has been felt. And I don't have a PowerPoint for you guys or anything like that, but I just want to implore you guys with like the emotion and perception and kind of the mood and feeling of what's going on in OPD right now. And that's what I hope my voice can be. The perception is that we've lost our motivation, our momentum, that kind of thing. And with that goal of being competitive, with that goal of, you know, taking care of our officers in that pay scale sort of way. You know, I hear people, they are thankful about the insurance work you guys are doing. You know, like that stuff is recognized. But a lot of times, especially with recruitment, retention and stuff, all people see are the dollar signs for the pay scale. And with, you know, Ogden officers being just as busy, you know, as, you know, the firefighters as well, first responders in the city work. And it's good experience, but kind of similar. We struggle with retention. Right now, there are several applications in for officers to go to other cities and even out of state cities. And, you know, our recruitment team and our training bureau does a really good job of getting new people in, but we're not keeping them. And even I see the frustration on the detective level, right? And even trying to help a patrolman out on a call or something like that. It's, you know, like a scramble of like, who am I talking to or what? You know, it's just those busy nights. And it almost feels like every night, especially with summer starting. And so I'm just here to, you know, it's a sense that these people are feeling, you know, like they're not as supported or not believed, or they love Ogden, you know, but they want to be able to do a living wage, you know, like insurance and stuff doesn't buy your groceries or make your house payment. And so it's that kind of perception that's going on right now. And it's a kind of testimonial myself, you know, I've loved Ogden. I've only applied to Ogden. I've wanted to work at Ogden since day one, since I had the academy. Love this city, love this police department. And even I've almost started to think about it. I haven't, you have my word, but even I've been like, oh, dang, that pay does look pretty good. Or, ooh, that, you know, call volume. You know, it's the call volume, it's the staffing. You know, we, you know, could do more numbers too. You know, if we have more officers to make the work easier, you know, I can see that being an additional benefit. But as of right now, it's staying competitive. And I know there's a lot of people are feeling a lot of contention about that study. You know, we haven't seen those numbers yet. And so it's kind of all up in the air right now. But I just hope to kind of be a voice to have you guys listen.
Are you talking about the compensation?
Yes. Yes.
We would like to see those numbers too.
I know that's a hot topic, right? And so I know that's still kind of up in the air for everybody, but I just want you guys to feel what I feel, you know, hear the voices that I hear of, you know, the struggle right now. So.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have concerns with the proposal to keep the existing pay schedule from July to August 1st, even though it's only 1 month. But I know that last year, even during the budget conversations, we were trying to see if there was ways to add additional increases for people. I wonder how that message was, you know, felt.
Yeah,
it's just a month delay, but
I think that some concern, but I think it's the overarching of, are they gonna follow through? Are they just kicking the can down the road? I've had more than one person ask me that. And I said, I don't know, I hope not. I hope they're gonna follow through. And I think people are just feeling hesitant, uncertain about the future right now with their careers at OPD, so. Any other thoughts or questions?
Thank you for that insight and very appreciate everything that you do, and thanks for being here, both of you.
Thanks for having us.
All right, John Thomas with the awesome ringtone. President of the Fraternal Order of Police. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
Well, it's a hot seat. And I apologize about my phone going off. I heard somebody talking about killer Mike, so I was like wrapping my head. I want to thank you guys for inviting us to come speak. I want to tell you up front, just like you, I'm an elected official, so please don't shoot the messenger. As Ann has stated, OPD, officers, detectives, administration, we're struggling. This feels like deja vu. I've been around with the city for almost 24 years. And it seems like every year we're coming before the city council, telling you guys how hard we work, telling you the struggle that we're having at the PD. I assume Chief Young has told you all about how busy Ogden officers are. We're the busiest department in the state of Utah. And we tell you guys this every year. And it seems like we're almost like, for lack of a better term, begging for scraps, begging for, whatever you can give us. And we're not happy about it. I represent 98% of the members of Ogden Police Department, as well as 90% of the civilians that work within the department. So there's a lot of members who, like Ann said, are frustrated, are looking at other agencies. Our staffing, I am the recruiter that she spoke about earlier. I believe it was last year, for one day, we were fully staffed, one day. And it seemed like overnight I was patting myself on the back, and then the next day I got kicked in the butt and said, hey, we had somebody leave, or put in an application, you need to get back to it. It's a struggle, it's a revolving door. I'm sure you've all heard that the Salt Lake City Police Chief has told our chief he will take an Ogden officer in a heartbeat, because we train, we make good officers. And I think that goes for fire, that goes for everybody in the city. I think city workers in Ogden overall are good, but they don't see it in their paycheck, unfortunately. And I don't know where the disconnect is, but there seems to be a big disconnect there. Staffing, that's a big thing for our department. You've heard, where the officers are running from call to call to call. That's a safety issue. We just buried an officer the other day who was from a small agency. He was up on the freeway helping the highway patrol because they didn't have a backup. Unfortunately, that is the beast that we deal with every day, where officers are running from call to call to call. And I don't want to see us lose an officer because he had to go on a call by himself and he didn't have the backup there. We're too big of a city, too successful of a police department to be doing that to our officers. We owe them more. The study that was mentioned earlier, we would like to see that as much as you. I think from looking at pay raises that information we gathered throughout the year, a lot of other agencies somehow are finding the money within their budget to pay their officers. And when I say pay their officers, there's numbers coming in where there's a top out of $58. Now, we don't expect that in Ogden, but we do expect to be, I guess, paid for the work that we do. And when I say that, everybody knows that there was an agreement that we would be in that 50% tile on the study for pay. But if we're doing 10 times the work of other agencies, why are we only at half? We should be higher in that study. We're working harder in fire and streets and every other department in the city. So why aren't we paid more? So with that being said, I think we have to come up with a system, some way to pay the men and women of Ogden Police Department. So we're not here every year sitting before you guys, letting you know how hard we work, how much we want to be with Ogden, but sometimes some of the guys cannot afford to stay with Ogden PD and take care of their families. So that's pretty much all I have to say. Any questions or concerns?
Councilmember Myers?
Yeah, Officer Thomas, just express our thanks to you and Officer Stillman and Officer Velasquez. You do a phenomenal job and with great pride, I say thank you. One of the things that I did early on as I campaigned for my seat, I've been here 4 months now. I'm going on that. Was do a ride with the cop. And it was eye-opening to me to spend a day in our city. It started off slow, but it got pretty quick towards the end of the day. So certainly the job you do is extraordinary and the risk that you take is commendable. And on my personal self, I just want to say thank you. It's complex looking at this budget and I don't have any answers for you at this point in time, but we hear you and recognize the valiant work that you do. And we're on your side. We don't want to be enemies. We want to, at least on my part, I don't think any of these other council members do either, but you're just an important resource to our city. And so thanks very much for all you do.
Thank you. Well, let me clarify. I don't want to make any enemies. We're not any
Certainly not.
city council. I think to a man, a woman, we truly love the city. I personally love the city. Like I said, I've been around in one form or fashion for almost 24 years, working with the city. I retired, I came back, and I'm still with the city. So I love the city and I recruit for the city. I recruit for the PD and I sell all the attributes of Ogden City and Ogden Police Department to all our new recruits. We have people coming from all over the country to work here in Ogden, Utah. And then, but you know, once they get here, they get the experience, they get the training, they get all that. Then they say, okay, well, this is too much. I'm going to this agency down the road where I can make $20 more an hour. And we can't, I know we can't compete with that, but we have to reward our guys and give them the money they need to feed their families.
So John, Alex had mentioned kind of a different approach of, well, not necessarily different, but the two-prong approach of wages, but also maybe adding staff. Do you feel like Ogden Police Department has a similar feeling where maybe additional staff is more important than wages or equally important, or how would you frame that?
I would say it's equally important. I think with anything with the money, you pay them, they will come. Right now, we're allocated 150 officers. The last time I checked, there was a rumor of 10 officers leaving. We just hired 4 yesterday, and I have a couple other in the pipeline. So we're slowly replacing them. But by the time we get them trained up and out on the road, we're still a year behind. And I think a city of our size and the call volume, Chief Young could probably answer that question better. But I can honestly say we could use 20 more officers on the road. So, and I know if we could just get our pay scale to where it's competitive with the other agencies, we will get the guys. They'll be beating down the doors. They will come. Ogden is a great place to work. We're supported by the city council, the mayor, the county attorney. That, and I tell people this when I recruit, that is a big sell, because if you see what's going on in Salt Lake County, they make a lot of money down there. But if an officer gets in a situation that is just a little shaky, they have Sim Gill coming after them, and they're sitting at home with a lot of money, but they're sweating because they're thinking about they're going to jail. It's a different beast here in Ogden where we're supported. We wait until the city council, the mayor, the county attorney waits till the facts come in, and then they make a decision on which way to go. And that's a big relief for officers when they're out there doing their job.
Where are a lot of these officers going? They're going for more money, but where is the more money?
So recently, Davis County, we lost somebody to Davis County. Layton. You know,
Farmington, Layton, Las Vegas, St. George or even Hurricane, like wherever that is. And, and UHP.
Yeah, we just saw
UHG.
some in North Ogden. didn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and
Yeah,
North Ogden, I guess
yeah.
toss that in there.
It's not much.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
UHG
that's
is
a
the last one.
Yeah.
Situation.
Different situation.
So, they're going to smaller agencies, slower workload. But if you do 2 years on the streets of Ogden, that's I safely say a 20-year career in Layton or Farmington. Ogden will give you the training. It will eat you up and spit you out if you let it, but it's a great place to work. So.
Last year, I think you had mentioned that the police academies, there were like the classes, we were turning out new officers that way. Is that coming around to where we're getting more applicants going through the police academies?
Self-sponsored or through the police department?
I don't know, but I just felt like, it seems like last year that there was just a lack of new candidates going through, or they weren't even able to hold classes because they didn't have enough students.
So we are at the mercy of Post. Well, there's 2 different academies. There's Post down in Sandy, Utah, which is the main campus. It's the full-time campus. And they tried to put on a academy class at least, so it's 16 weeks, so at least every 2 months, 3 months. And then there's Weber State. Weber State is not a full-time academy. Most of the people that go there are from the smaller agencies or people that self-sponsor themselves. The 2 individuals we just hired from there are self-sponsored. They paid their way through the academy. We do offer a reimbursement of $3,000, but in the big scheme of things, that's not a lot. That doesn't really pay for the amount they pay out of their pocket. So yeah, there's academy classes available, but it's still it's the time and effort that we put into training them up, getting them to where they can get out on the road and be productive. That's where we're falling behind. So,
Thank you. I have a question.
yes.
It's kind of a philosophical thing. I'd like you to respond to it. I think, we've been told in years past, when we've tried to deal with this disparagement and pay issue, that there are some jurisdictions, the big ones, Salt Lake, Unified, Highway Patrol, that their budget they just will always be on top. Right? They don't have any restriction. They have the money to do it. And so we've got to be a little careful. We don't push them too hard.
Right.
To just knock their level back up again and still keep that giant gap. And I think we felt pretty good about it a year and a half ago, something like that. Have we fallen behind again? Have they wrapped it up? And
Yes.
okay, so how do we keep that sweet spot going? And I guess, to the point that was made earlier, call volume is a big issue. So we've just got to throw some more officers at the problem too. Is it a both approach to this?
It is. And I think, we all know here at Ogden that we will never be paid what Salt Lake City is paid. They have negotiated that they will always be the highest agency along the Wasatch Front. But with that being said, are Salt Lake officers better than us? No, not at all. You go down to Salt Lake right now, their training bureau is made up of all former Ogden officers. So that should tell you something. We just want to be compensated. And I don't know if this is going to come out wrong, but in Weber County, we're the best department. North of Salt Lake, we're the biggest agency, busiest agents, and we want to be compensated accordingly. That's to answer your question, that's the best way I can put it. I know, that down in that valley, the pay is going to continue to climb. We're not going to keep up with it, but we need to be competitive. And if we can get a boost or a bump I can guarantee you that there will be some Salt Lake cops coming back, because when we got the last bump, we got 3 of them back.
Yeah.
So, I mean, guys want to work, men and women want to work for Ogden. They love the city and they love what Chief Young, the direction that he's taking the PD, and they want to work here. We just gotta compensate them.
Well, I salute you. You help me sleep comfortable in my beds at night. I am proud to say I'm from Ogden with respects to our police and fire departments. Our first responders are second to none, and we very much appreciate all of you and what you do for us.
And I just want to say, I don't want to steal any stolen valor or anything. I'm not on the road anymore. I can't do it. I retired. I'm just recruiting them in. So I sleep well at night, just like you, knowing that Ogden officers are out there. And I've said this before, if I was ever in a situation where I was being held hostage, I'd have an Ogden officer take a headshot in a heartbeat. Heartbeat, would not hesitate. So that's the kind of men and women that are backing you up.
Awesome. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
All right. We'll bring Justin back up. Busy night for Justin Sorensen, our controller, to talk about general fund revenues.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you guys.
Thank you,
Sorry I
guys.
got ahead.
Where should I send that email with the?
To Brandon.
To Brandon.
You can just send it to citycouncil@ogdencity.com.
Okay, that'll work. Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Alex.
You too. I just thought yelling city council.
It's better than no, not me.
All right. So back up, Justin.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to be here again, to go over revenues with everybody, what's proposed in the budget. As I'm going through these slides, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. And I know the next item, I also be presenting on in regards to the BDO's revenue as well. If there are questions that I'm not able to answer, I've got 2 amazing people over here that can assist me with Marion in this just in case. So again, please stop me. Feel free to stop me as we are going through these. But as we begin, the budget for fiscal year 25, the proposed budget, this is the total amount that we were proposing as revenues for the city, over $90 million. This is our biggest general fund budget. So, and of that, 58 million of that comes from taxes, so property taxes, sales tax, franchise taxes, and we'll talk a little bit more about those in detail. 3.8% of our budget, or 3.4 million, is from our licenses and permits. 7.2 million from our intergovernmental revenues. Those are coming from other sources, state, county, federal. Fines and forfeitures, 2.2 million. Transfers, this is a bigger one this year, and I'll go into more detail as to what makes up that 10 million. This is a pretty big jump over last year and what we're transferring into the general fund from other funds. And then there's also a proposed use of fund balance this year, which I'll talk about in a few slides. And then the rest of our revenues, charges for services and other smaller miscellaneous revenues, including interest income, total 6.8 million, or 7.6% of our budget. So in looking at our general fund taxes for next year, you can see the breakdown of our fiscal year 24 adopted budget versus what's proposed for next year. Property taxes, we're proposing to increase that 782,000, and I have the detail on the next slide of what makes up that increase. So I'll talk about that in a moment. And then in a couple slides, I have a little more information regarding sales tax, but for right now, we are proposing to leave that budget flat for next year. I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. Franchise taxes, this includes the franchise tax that we received from Waterline Power, Dominion Energy, our municipal energy that we also receive, and also Comcast makes up our franchise taxes. A couple of those have actually increased a decent amount, and so we're proposing to increase those revenues, but in total of 400,000 for our franchise taxes. And then fee and lieu, this is the vehicle revenue, vehicle registration revenue that we receive. For next year, we're proposing. So the overall increase, again, taxes is just shy of $1.2 million. Regarding property taxes, the mayor talked about this in his presentation last week. The goal with property taxes the way the state writes it is that to keep that revenue flat each year, unless we go through the taxation process. Besides any natural growth. And so each year we program in a natural growth factor. And the last few years, it's been around 3%. So we're programming in that 3% increase, which is equivalent to around $600,000 for any new growth that's happened in the city over the last year. And then the property tax increase, which the mayor talked about, the proposal would be, if we go through the truth and taxation process, that we would keep the rate flat and estimating around a 1% increase, which is equivalent to 183,000. This, and then our delinquent tax collections, we're proposing to leave that flat at $500,000. So this brings our total property tax budget for next fiscal year to the proposed budget at $21,289,875.
I've got a question. That's okay. And I don't know if you're the correct person to answer the question, but I was curious. When Mayor Nadolski was on the council, we did talk a lot as a council about the challenge with that property tax rate increase, all that business. So I'm wondering if this is more of like a philosophical approach moving forward, that we might do this every year to keep up with that that we've lost, or thought that we were losing over the past year. Do you know the answer to that, or?
I can answer part of it. If there's more, maybe Lisa or Mara could, but I know philosophically, I think as homes appreciate, and we're not able to capture that without going through that taxation process. And I think in years past, Janine, in her presentation, she's talked a lot about that, about how much money we've lost due to, as the appreciation's gone up, but we haven't captured that increase. And so the hope for next year is, again, that we would hope to try and capture that small appreciation.
And next year, you mean
in this coming budget,
2025?
yes.
But I guess, just to catch newer council members up, I guess I'm just curious, because that makes me think about this a little differently than if it's a one-time deal, or if it's kind of what we're thinking about doing as we move forward.
Welcome, Mara.
Thanks. Yeah, just to follow up a little
Make
bit.
sure you talk about.
Yeah, I will look up a little bit, but I think in your financial principles as well, you put that forward of doing it annually so that we stay on top, or at least considering it.
Considering, yeah, it wasn't that we were saying we wanted to.
That you would, but considering it annually, and so I think the administration is looking at that as though we would consider it annually. Two factors, one of them is being very aware of our citizens, and like this year we looked at the statistical wage growth in our area compared with the inflation, and there was a gap where wage growth exceeded the cost increases by about 1%, and that is about what the property tax growth. So it fell in line with that, but I think we will evaluate that every year. So both evaluate looking at doing an annual, at least keep the rate level so that we don't get behind again, like we did for about 30 years or so, until we adjusted about a couple of years, but then also that second factor of looking at the wage growth and what is the level of affordability of our citizens.
And I don't have strong reservations, but I just think that would be a good thing to communicate to people, that's why, the sort of philosophical approach to that, to do it every year so they're not, shocked by that if it continues.
Yeah, and it's the same, the county budget, for example, it's like cities in our community and the county itself have suffered when it's not evaluated every year and keeping the rate level, because you just have to make those huge jumps, and it's not partial, it's hard. It's seemingly more expensive for residents to make that huge jump. So I think that's why philosophically we will consider it annually.
So the 183 is the amount you need. So if the rate needs to go up a 1.5%, well, that's it. So are we trying to hit that 183,000 mark, or are we trying to hit the 1% mark?
I believe the 1%, that 183 was the estimate that we had, correct?
Yeah, I just wondered if we needed
yes.
the 183 or if we want the 1%.
It's the 1% is what we were aiming for.
183.
The 180. Sorry. Yeah.
So that's the mark we're trying to hit.
Yeah, I thought the mayor made mention that number actually funds the money that is falling away now for health, mental health and benefits to our first responders, right?
Yeah. Was it budgeted and it was a state law requirement that we do fund that.
Right,
And that's part of the noticing when.
an
you
unfunded
increase
mandate.
it. Yeah, and so that would be. But that would be noticed to cover that unfunded.
So for a number of reasons, I'm gonna just chime in with what Angela brought up. Yeah, I think, and Mara also agreed to, is I think it's important that we have this conversation with our community around property taxes each year. I have wondered, in fact, with Marcia the other day, if we were to ask citizens in this city, what percentage of the city budget is funded by your property taxes? I think we'd get something like 90%. I think in a $300 million budget, if we told people that only 20 million of it is coming from property taxes, they would find that unbelievable. And most people think their taxes are going up every year anyway, because their property values have gone up. I think we've got an opportunity to have a conversation with our property tax paying community about how property taxes work. I think there's a level of understanding that could be improved by opening this up every year and talking with folks in the city.
Sure. I'm just laughing because I was listening to Nate, like, we're trying to communicate that every year.
Yeah.
But it's so confusing too, because there's also a disparity between the commercial property
Right.
taxes and the residential, and there's so many issues, but yeah, I completely agree. It's definitely an education tool, because when we say we're not, that the rate is flat, they're like, no,
Oh,
it's not.
it's not.
I'm paying a lot more every year.
It's
I
up
mean, it's
because
not
something
flat at
else
all.
is
Yeah.
down. Yeah.
It's not flat.
Yep.
It's an increase, but when you say we're gonna keep your rate level, but it's still considered.
It's a rate.
An increase.
Yeah.
Or-
It's increasing their costs, their dollars that they have to, allocate to that.
Property tax is a very confusing topic for a lot of people.
For sure.
And then when you consider that it's only a piece of the overall pie too, that Ogden City is part of with their property tax.
Yeah, and I think that we allowed, as Mara mentioned, for a lot of years, there wasn't a truth in taxation hearing held. So that allowed everybody to kind of leave their heads in the sand around what property taxes are all about, because they weren't a subject for conversation.
Part of the other issue that I hear, and you all probably do too, is from the little old lady who $4 is a big deal, and any amount of raise is an issue. And because they're not, their budgets aren't full of lavish spending. Their budgets are full of paying the water bill and the rent and the taxes and one thing or another. And, I think those are the things that make each of us very mindful, but still costs go up, and you hear from the police union and the fire union, and these guys need to live too. And I don't know, I really wish the state would let us have a natural growth without a truth in taxation. I think most jurisdictions just let it go at that. And then it really would be, I think it would be a flat thing, just naturally. But
So I have to elect some different people to the state.
And as I said, the philosophy will always balance as best as it can
Amen.
I
affordability.
could come in, I could.
Yeah. Is there any sense on how, we know that over the last few years, residential has outpaced commercial significantly, and that burden of taxes has shifted more on residential. Is that equalizing? Do we know? I mean, we won't know, I guess, until June 7th, the property tax detail, but I mean, what's the sense from the 9th floor on that in terms of like the residential versus the commercial real estate?
I personally haven't seen or heard. I think once we get the numbers in June, it'll give us a better idea. But I know that is a going concern. I've seen a lot of information out there about that. And so
I
there isn't a lot of requirement for commercial to really disclose the value of their property. So it's really challenging for the assessor's office to value commercial until something changes at the state level that requires more disclosure or more information. I don't know that we'll see a huge amount of change. I mean, that's my hope too, is that we'll see more value to the commercial side of Ogden City, but
There is a way we can do some analysis on that. If you think, we look at it over the last 5 or 6 years, if you're really interested.
It just
in
feels
that.
like that's the trend. I'm just wondering, the trend, like all trends.
Last year was.
Yeah, they maybe have corrections at times,
The
but
last 2 years
Yeah,
have been
yeah.
pretty tough for residents, so.
yeah, okay.
On the, just real quick on the delinquent tax collections, that's a nice little chunk. That's 2% of 2.5% of the total. What was collected last year in delinquents? Is this a number that is bigger than previous years in our budget?
So the budget we're proposing for next year is flat, and that number, it fluctuates each year. It just depends on circumstances. There's so many things that play into that as far as when those.
Right.
When we receive funds.
Okay, so you're just basically letting
Historically, this is.
previous years roll into the,
Yeah, so historically, we look at it and where that trend is, and it's
Okay.
around this happening.
okay.
And that actually is, this is just a snapshot of where we're at year to date. So I just pulled these numbers yesterday. So where we're at on our property taxes, we still have 2 more distributions to go for the year. Obviously, most of our property taxes are received in December. And then sales tax, we have 3 more months of distribution there. That one is a month delayed getting that from the state. So we still have 3 more months there. And then franchise taxes and municipal energy tax, those ones vary, but most of those were still 3 more distributions there. And then the lieu of taxes, the motor vehicle, we have 2 more distributions there. So you can see where we're at right now, revenue to budget on our taxes, the general fund.
Can you just do me a favor? And you've mentioned motor vehicles in the fee in lieu of.
Yes.
Can you define that a little bit more clearly? For
So
me?
the registration fees.
Okay.
For motor vehicle registrations.
Okay.
Vehicle registrations.
Does the sales tax on a vehicle sold within the Ogden city limits stay in Ogden City? If someone in Ogden is gonna register a car in Ogden, purchases a car in Davis County, do those tax monies come to us?
Yeah, no, she's gotta get up. We gotta get
It's not a sales tax, but
Not the sales tax?
Well, there's a formula.
yeah, so sales tax, we receive 50%, pretty much 50% of our sales tax based on point of sale. So it has to happen in Ogden City. And 50% based on population. So the state looks at the population of Utah and they distribute 50% based on point of sale and
Oh,
50%
yeah.
of population. So there is a little bit of a commingling of
Yeah.
funds there. As far as the fee in lieu of, it's based on our ad valorem tax, so our property tax values. So the county will collect the property tax. They don't look at where you live. They will distribute it based on the value of the property, the fee in lieu of.
Okay, interesting.
So, like you said, we get most of our property taxes early on. I mean, it says we still have 2 months left, but we're probably not gonna get 1.9 million.
a part of that does include personal property tax that is included
Oh,
with our
okay.
property tax distribution, and that we get towards the end of the year, end of our fiscal year. So we've been pretty close to budget on what we projected for property taxes more or less.
Oh, okay, so you think we'll be pretty close? Okay.
Yeah, we're not concerned on where we're at with property taxes. Sales tax is a little bit of a different story. So this is a little bit of history of what our sales tax revenue has done from 2013 till 2023. You can see the large increase in 2021 and 2022 of a 15% increase those 2 years. And in then fiscal year 23, that increase was only 1.5%. And right now, year to date, what we're with 3 months left, what we're projecting out, where we're at year to date, we're estimating that we'll probably end up about 2% below below our budgeted number, which is equivalent to about $600,000, just under $600,000. But that number still would exceed the 26.1 million that we received last year in sales tax. So kind of give you an idea. So it's definitely flattening out from what we saw from those couple of years due to the major inflation and COVID and the money that got pumped into the economy. So we definitely seen a slowing there. And so that's why we're proposing to keep that revenue flat for next year. As we see where that's trending. So. And looking at other revenues for the general fund, there are some other adjustments throughout the general fund that I'll just speak briefly of on some of our smaller revenues. For licenses and permits, we're proposing to increase our building permits revenues by $204,000. A lot of that is as we have seen an increase to our fees and also just building going on in the city. We're going on 4 years now of our building permits being well over $2.2 million. And so we're proposing to increase that up to that 2.2. We still haven't seen anything indicating that's going to trail off yet. So we're proposing an increase there. The decrease to animal licenses, that's just to true up that revenue to what our actuals have been. So it's a slight increase there. So the overall change to our licensing permit revenue is an increase of $186,000. Our intergovernmental revenues, the two changes there. One is our state funds. Those that $6.2 million is mainly from our B and C road funds we received that we budget, as well as our active transportation revenue, which those are both restricted for a specific use for to be able to use for streets and roads and road maintenance. And so we're increasing that revenue just based on what has the historical increase to those as well. And then the miscellaneous increase written down. That increase of $180,000, we brought to you in an earlier budget opening to add an additional school resource officer that's going to be working at the Ogden Preparatory Academy. So the increase to that revenue is to cover the money that we'll be receiving from the school for that officer, and also to true up that revenue based on we bill out that revenue each year to the rest of that gets billed to the school district. And so we're adjusting based on actual costs for those police officers. So that total increase is $180,000. So the intergovernmental revenue is a total increase of $414,000.
So can you go back a slide?
Yes.
On the animal licenses, I'm sorry, I have to ask. Is this dogs and cats?
It's licensing for pets.
Honest to God, we get that
Don't
kind of
forget
turnout
chickens.
for licensing dogs and cats, and we can't get people with an Airbnb to come and buy a business license. Honest to God, that is mind boggling. Okay.
You know,
It's an awakening,
it's a
isn't
safe space, right? It's a safe space.
All right.
Not a cone of
I will
silence.
not filter myself. That's just wild. All right.
Under charges for services, the revenue increases there under the administrative portion. That's attributed to our 5% transfer that comes from the utilities that we'll be talking about later on. So that increases $126,000. We've also made a few other adjustments to some revenues, just for your information, that results in that $196,000 increase. Part of it is the police department has been receiving revenue for some services they provide over the last couple of years. So we're increasing that's a miscellaneous revenue under the police department by $30,000. So that's an addition. And then we also, our new development fees have continued to increase over the last several years. We've added fees there and also increased some fees to engineering brought to you last year. So we're proposing to increase our new development revenue by $100,000 as well. And then we also have a reduction to our collection fee revenue this was our first year with that revenue. So we're adjusting to where those actuals are. So that net increase is $196,000 for our administrative revenues for charges for services. Parks and Recreation, that's mainly truing up. A lot of these we look at historically what's been happening. And so Parks and Recreation, as we've seen our recreation programs continue to rebound from COVID and they're doing well. We're proposing to increase that revenue slightly by $18,000 for our Parks and Recreation. So the net increase for charges for services is an increase of $214,000. Fines and forfeitures, our court fines. When COVID hit, we had decreased that budget to, I believe, 1.4 million. And then slowly over the last 5 years, it's continued to climb. 1.7 is what we had actually budgeted in 2019 pre-COVID. We're back to that level, and this year we're actually gonna be close to or exceed 1.8. And so just based on that trend, we're proposing to increase that to 1.8 for next year. So the overall change in fines and forfeitures is an increase of 100,000. Another big change or big increase is to our interest income in the general fund. We're proposing to increase that by 750,000. As we have continued to have a high interest rates, we're projecting that we'll continue to see that interest. So as long as rates are high, we will budget that way. And so that is a decent increase to our interest income for next year that we're proposing. Under the other or miscellaneous revenues, I apologize, that increase is due to our RDA admin transfer that we program in. So a majority of that increase is due to that. So that overall increase under our miscellaneous grouping of revenues is just over 100,000. And then the last section is our fund balance carryover. So normally we budget revenues to expense without using fund balance, but we're proposing to use $1 million of fund balance for next year's budget. One of the projects that engineering is working on, the 20th Street project, has WACOG funds, but there's the project is a lot more expensive, so they're needing additional funds. And so as part of that, we budget each year for how much we anticipate receiving in DNC funds and active transportation funds, and we have exceeded those revenues several years, and that excess ends up going into a restricted fund balance that we hold. Because those can only be used for a certain purpose. And so we're proposing to use a portion of those. At the end of fiscal year 23, between the two, we had around $3 million in restricted fund balance. So
I'll ask a question about the WACOG funds. I know that while I was serving on the COG, there were many occasions where municipalities, of course, had applied for WACOG funds, and then when they finally got down to doing the project, it became more expensive than it was. There's always been a match, I mean, everybody has some kind of a match to do, but they've come in and they've appealed to get a bigger chunk to cover the deficit.
Right.
I don't recall us ever doing that.
I know Justin Anderson is here, our public services director. Maybe you could speak more on that 20th Street project, because I think part of it is the scope to expand it to, and so there's
a betterment issue, and we're in charge of betterments, but the official project that was applied for, I think we ought to be going in there.
So you are absolutely correct. We have not gone back and applied. Typically, most of our projects, we come in under budget. On this one, because we actually got a pretty good price, we feel, because of the escalating costs. And so we had limited the scope to just stopping at Harrison originally.
Right.
And because of that cost, we now realized we had enough money to actually go to the east side and to fix that intersection. And so
I thought that was its own project though.
we did have some funds in there, but we didn't have enough funds.
Okay.
And so we're now just incorporating it all into one project with the contractor due to the costs that we got from them. And so that's the reason why we're really expanding the project. But we have also applied for some WACOG funds for some other projects too. So we felt with the additional funding that was available that hadn't been allocated, we could cover this cost, and then we could apply for new projects.
Okay, I just want, I mean, the plan service ought to be level for all of us in the county, and that's why I just thought, well, if we're running into higher costs because of inflation or because of unforeseen things, we ought to be petitioning for an increase in.
Yeah, I feel like the applying for the new projects would actually give us the ability to get more funding than if we just applied for this overage.
Okay. I remember last year was a lot of fun when Far West had 5 projects. Well, we only have 2, I think. So
So,
Anyway, I'm not bitter.
You've got road envy, though.
I appreciate you looking out for Ogden City.
Yes. That $1 million we're proposing to transfer out of the city and will go to the CIP fund to be added to our 20th Street project. So, and then the last grouping is the transfers in from other funds. That one is a pretty big increase of 10 million. So I thought it'd be beneficial to break that out. So what makes up that $10 million transfer into the general fund. A portion of it, a good portion of it is the 12% utility transfer that we do each year that we've been noticing. So that's a majority of that 10 million. But then the other portion is the transfers from our BDO lease revenue, which that is increasing next year. You can see the things that we funded this year as one-time funds from BDO lease revenue. It included some funding for staffing for the general plan update, as well as the elections costs that we incur. And then also putting some funding in for a parking project coordinator that was one-time funding for fiscal year 24. So that was removed out of the budget for next year. And then we're programming and proposing a position in a different way for next year. So in the budget for next year,
Yeah, I'm having a hard time following you right now on my worksheet that was sent out to us. I didn't see where you jumped to the general fund transfer.
So this one wasn't in this breakout detail wasn't in the packet. This is something the packet would have just showed the total 10 million. I thought it would be helpful to provide in the presentation that actual detail, what makes up that 10 million. Okay, so I added this information for the presentation today. And Brandon has that so that it'll get uploaded and just sent out to everybody.
And then there are some residents of Ogden City who challenge that transfer, that 12% utility transfer.
Mm-hmm.
And can you just explain that to us again? I know you've done it before, but if you would mind responding to that again, so we can be prepared how we respond to our constituents.
Yeah. So essentially, that transfer is a fee in lieu. So instead of, because these utilities that we have, we don't charge a franchise tax to them. And so we justify this transfer similar to like we receive a franchise revenue from Comcast, from Questar, or not Questar, sorry, Rocky Mountain Power, Green Energy. So to justify that and to help cover, because we do have an administrative cost, but just the cost to run those utilities. And so that transfer, we use those funds from the utilities.
So for me, a better way what makes more sense to me is to explain that those cover Ogden City's administrative costs that are not necessarily billed to their services that Ogden City provides that are not a part of they're not covered by the utility transfer. So that is reimbursed back to Ogden City. Would that be a correct way of explaining that?
Yeah, you could say it that way.
I don't think that's perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
It pays for, things like the attorneys and the accountants and stuff like that aren't built into the rate.
Yeah, but
Can I'd like to correct that.
That's not right.
Yeah.
The total transfer out of the enterprise funds is 17%. 5% is administrative cost. So we justify that for the services provided to the utility funds. The 12% is simply a transfer. There's no exchange of value. We're simply just using the justification of property tax and franchise fees to charge the utility to help support general fund operations.
Because they don't pay property tax.
Correct.
Transfer fee.
There's no exchange of value.
Mm.
It's simply a 12% transfer in addition to the administration fee.
So, and I'm gonna take another stab at it. Dominion Energy is gonna make a profit. Ogden City is taking a profit for providing these utility services, yeah?
So generally, the profit would stay in the utility fund and support the improvements related to the improvements there. But the city can't levy a tax on its own utility funds. So we called it a fee in lieu of. It was simply a policy decision that was made years and years ago,
Decades ago.
that it would be good for the city to have an established amount that they take each year. Some cities do this, but it differs each year. There's no rhyme or reason. They just balance their general fund against it. The city made a policy decision that they would charge a fee in lieu of 6% for property tax and 6% for franchise fees. And that was a way to keep property taxes lower.
So you may recall, we asked Fred Philpott of LRB to do the study to evaluate whether or not, the rationale could be justified, and he's done that, and I actually haven't read it, but he just sent a written report from that presentation. It's in draft form, but once we get that finalized, hopefully in the next couple of days, then that will be available for you to make available to your constituents. We'll get it posted on the website somewhere. They don't necessarily like the answer, but at least they can understand it better. So.
The thing that I think that the way you presented it in the past is it allows us to get some of that value out of these nonprofits that otherwise would not pay property tax. And so therefore, if you kind of take all that, it's actually really lowering people's bills or property tax because we're getting money from things we wouldn't normally get it from.
And Fred was able to validate that through the LRB study.
You, Lisa? No.
I have a question going back. I apologize. I wasn't fast enough before we started this and I didn't want to interrupt. But when you were talking on the last slide about the restricted fund for the balance transfer, what is that restricted to?
So we're using, we have the PNC road funds that we received, and then also the active transportation. Each year we budget an amount for those. And many years, the revenue that we've actually received has exceeded that. And we have not appropriated those funds. And so what happens at the end of the year is we put those on our books as in a restricted fund balance. They can only be used for street maintenance, roads, transportation. And so to be able to, because of all the other projects that we're funding next year, and with this big project on 20th Street, additional funds were needed. And in order to fund what we're proposing to fund next year in the CIP fund, we needed some additional funds. And so in talking to engineering, we decided, since we have this excess fund balance for this purpose, we wanted to propose using that next year, which will still leave us a couple $1 million in restricted fund balance for if something else comes up during the year at any time. But again, it's restricted to only be for those uses. So.
And
go ahead.
So I just need to follow up. So does sidewalks qualify for that?
Yes. Yes. So we use BNC and Prop 1 funds for our sidewalks and streets.
And then on the same slide, top line, interest earned, right? So what are the monies that are generating $750,000 worth of interest earnings for us?
Just the cash that we hold in our investment account.
Okay, so we're managing that money to our advantage. It isn't, so I imagine when we issued bonds for the Wonder Block, they're not in there.
No.
They're in their own
They're
fund
yes.
and generating their own interest.
Correct.
For use in that project.
Correct.
Okay.
This is just the city's funds. It's held in the PTIP, the Public Treasury Investment Fund.
Okay.
And so, and that rate, last I looked, it's been averaging over 5%. So we've been getting a decent return on the cash that we have.
Yep.
So.
Okay. Thank you.
Justin?
Yes.
I'm gonna go back to that 12%.
Sorry, I didn't mean.
No, that's okay.
Interrupt.
I just have some constituents that I need to be able to answer their questions. So in today's paper, there was a
Oh, yeah.
article about that 12% from a friend of mine. And he just states that it's unrealistic to expect that our old utility systems be replaced without new debt. He proposes this utility fund be used to pay or other utility expenses for maintenance and upgrades. I'm sorry, you've got a terminology in the city that I can't grasp right now in my mind. So he's proposing that not go over into the general fund, other than it be used for things like the water project or other city expenses that relate to utilities or infrastructure improvements. How do you answer him? Because I want to know what you say so that I know what to say to my good buddy, Lynn Wood.
I think the biggest thing is what we've just talked about is this really is having this transfer in is really a savings for citizens on their property taxes. Because without this transfer, without this revenue coming in the general fund, to balance the general fund, we'd have to either have to cut services
I think
or,
that's what he suggested in his letter, cut services.
yeah,
Yes.
which,
Or it would require a 40% increase in property taxes is what he states.
You might not be far off on that, yeah.
I know Lynn really well. He's probably spot on. So, yeah.
For me, I have one response to that, if you don't mind. One thing that I think about a lot is that the water utility, all of the people that live in Ogden City utilize that. So we gain funds from everyone, whether they're not for profit or whatever kind of commercial business, etc. Whereas if it's a property tax, we're only going to get it from the entities that are not for profit. So it sort of evens the playing field to get it from the water utility fund because it spreads across more users. It's based on usage rather than on land.
We got a lot of nonprofit, all the governmental, all the, IRS, churches, all and churches.
Yep.
We got a lot of government.
Yes. So,
Yeah,
so does that help answer?
yes.
And just interestingly, $6 million on a $90 million budget is a lot of money. That's 40 police officers. So if he thinks maybe we should cut 40 police officers, you just heard where we are, OPD thinks they are. It's not, they think it's not as easy as they might think it is to find $6 million.
and while I appreciate Mr. Wood's thinking, if we as homeowners approached our homes the same way, there would be an account that went to roof replacement every month. Because in 20 years, we need to replace the roof, or every 20 years, we need to paint, or we need to do something to keep our homes up. But I wonder how many of us actually have a set aside for a new roof or new siding in our homes.
That's what the help loans for. I have a question that goes from way back. Maybe it's on the property taxes, residents versus commercial. And I just pulled up my property tax notice from a couple of years ago. Primary property is taxed at 55%. When does a property quit being primary property? Does it when somebody else owns it?
You get another.
Or when it's a vacation rental, or I don't know when it becomes something other than a primary, because apartments, that's their primary residence. Are those taxed at 55 or are they taxed at?
We haven't had this.
Because it's residential.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Residential tax.
so does a vacation rental, that obviously is not
That's
primary.
it higher.
That goes to 100%?
I don't think so.
It depends on if it's their second home or
It's
their
a second
first home.
home.
It just depends on how many places you own personally.
Yes, if it's your second home, it's 100%.
I don't think so.
All right, that's probably a topic. we could
Yeah.
possibly go back
We
on.
can find it out.
Yeah, just in
But
light.
that's what I was kind of wondering is
I think,
it kind of occurred to me that, maybe that's why people aren't registering their vacation rentals, their short-term rentals.
Thank you.
Yes. The other transfers in, we'll talk more in detail in the BDO presentation, so I'll skip over those right now. So the overall change in the general fund is an increase of $7.5 million or 9%. So that's the general fund. The packet did list other revenues for the city. So just quickly going through those, our tourism and marketing, that's where we receive our hotel tax.
Yeah.
We're projecting that to increase slightly by 23,000 to recognize that revenue, additional revenue. The CIP fund is a decrease of almost 6 million. A part of that was fiscal year 24. We had a couple of big WAPOG projects, and so taking those out, and the net change is a decrease in the CIP fund, within 6 million. The water utility, the sanitary sewer, the utility funds, so the water, sanitary, refuse, and storm, those increases are mainly due to the proposed rate increases for each of those funds respectively. The airport fund, a majority of that increase is with anticipating that we'll have the flights so that we'll be able to get the $1 million, the few million for the FAA. So we program that in as well. So that's why there's an increase in the airport fund. Golf course. One of the big things I wanted to make everybody aware in the golf course is we've removed the transfer out of the general fund into the golf course next year. We've been doing that for several years. So right now we've proposed to do that with how they're doing out there at the golf course. We are proposing to increase their revenues, but they're doing well. The recreation fund, the recreation enterprise fund, we're proposing to decrease that revenue. As programs have come back online after, in the last 4 years, the revenues in that fund in particular have not rebounded. That may not necessarily be that those activities are still not there. It just may be that we're coding those revenues and corresponding expenses out of the general fund, and so we're adjusting that fund down. Parking and mobility, this is the new fund that we talked about that we'll use to be able to eventually record the revenues coming in from the parking, and then we would whatever expenses associated with that, and also the payment that would go out of that fund to the NBA fund. So we've added that as a new fund. And then we have our property management, which is our BPO. This includes both the Boyer piece as well as for the infrastructure and also the lease revenue. So that is a really big increase, but partially because of how much we're proposing to use the fund balance, and then also what we're proposing the lease revenue to increase. So that increases that fund. And the medical services, just as we adjust revenues each year, that increases as well. So the total enterprise fund increases $12.5 million from all our enterprise funds. The internal service funds for fleet facilities, IT, and risk, we adjust those each year based on the activities needed in those funds, and then we charges that appropriately to the general fund and other funds. So you can see the net change of those accounts. So we look at those each year and adjust what is needed within those funds.
Are we going back? Are we also covering the DPO lease revenue piece after this? Okay, so I saw it separately on the agenda.
And then the last part is just our grant funds. You can see the net change there is a decrease of 2 million. Most of that is due to the annual action plan that was adopted last week and the changes there. So you can see that overall decrease. So the Ogden City budget, in the proposed Ogden City budget is an increase of 12.4 million, which is 266,718. Any additional questions regarding revenues?
I don't think so. And Justin, we're going to give you a little bit of a break here. We're going to invite Gabe up to talk about the water and refuse discount amendments, and then see where that takes us in terms of our 6 p.m. meeting, and then maybe we come back after. All right, welcome, Gabe. Got your financial analysis. Sure.
Or the nicer thing I can call. Yeah, my name is Gabe. I work under Brandy in the treasurer's office. I'm a financial analyst. And I do work closely with utility billing. They are held under the division. Tonight, we were talking about utility billing discounts and the proposal to modify how we provide those discounts and also expand the number of people who would be eligible for them. Go ahead and go to the next slide, or am I doing?
Whatever you want.
So to give some background on what we currently do, we use a 50% rate on the water base rate. And obviously that does change year to year based on whatever CPI increase occurs. And then there's a flat $2.50 off of garbage service. There is no CPI attached to that at this point. So for right now, for this year, that equals to $15.42 per month, or about $185 a year. How you get into that program is actually based upon the property tax relief program that the county uses. And so that is the place where people start. And if they are successful applicants to that program, then we receive that same data from the county, and those are the folks that would receive this discount on their utility bill in the next year. Hopefully that makes sense.
Do you have any idea what the qualifications are?
They have several categories. One is financial hardship. There is one for visual impairment, disabled veterans, and deployed military. And then specifically what you have to do to get into that, it's all covered by the county. I don't know that in that detail.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
But they get $15.42 off per month.
Correct.
Just whether their bill's $100 or $500.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, that is correct. What we have found is when we transitioned to our new utility billing system about 2 years ago, we essentially copied what we were doing in the old system to the new, which really doesn't work very well. And so this has actually been an item that we've been interested in reviewing for some time. And having the change in utility rate discussion and all of that seemed like a good time to bring this up now. And kind of do this at the same time. So what we are wanting to do is modify that so that it is a flat $15.50 per month adjusted by BIA, excuse me. That is the same rate that our water utility will be adjusted by each year. I'm kind of going hand in hand with that. So the $15.50 would be fiscal 25 or 24-25, and then it would be adjusted upward going from there. We would also include additional categories of the tax relief program from the county. Currently, the only group that we are doing is the financial hardship component. So this would include the visual impairment, disabled veterans, and also deployed military. And so we would essentially be providing discounts for the 4 categories that the county also provides property tax relief for. Okay. Yes.
Can you tell me what the BIA stands for? I'm sorry.
Yes. I had to look that up myself. It's a blended inflation adjustments. So it's a comparable to CPI or consumer price index change. Additionally, having worked internally and then also with our software provider, we've found a better way to administer those discounts so that it is far less manual and far less labor intensive for a utility billing staff to add and then maintain those over time. And so from a customer's perspective, they wouldn't notice much difference as far as the way that the program is administered or the amount that they would receive as a discount. But it will, again, expand the number of people that can receive that discount, and it also makes it far easier for us to administer internally. So I am happy to take any other questions on.
Just for my own knowledge, do you have a number? How many people take advantage of this?
So currently it runs about 400, and we would expand it to about 1,000 per year.
Has there been a clamor amongst, 550 people that would say, I need a break?
No, it is.
I'm just wondering what the motivation for the expansion of the program is.
Sure. So as we are seeing increases in our rates for water based on the projects that we're undertaking, it seemed like a good time to expand that to include more people who might be in need or have that need. And so that was the reason why we looked to expand and include more people in it.
Kind of to Bart's point, though, is there any kind of oversight if we're giving somebody a discount on their water bill and their water use is way over the top, and they're paying their $500 water bill, but getting a discount? Is there any oversight that says this person probably doesn't need a discount?
So.
Or maybe need to be counseled on saving water.
And both things could
That was
happen.
fine.
Yeah, so the discount itself does not change based on water usage. It's just that flat amount. And in cases where we would see any kind of excessive water use, we do have water conservation staff who would be visiting that person to look into it. And then as far as the purpose for the discount, we do, by nature of the program, rely on the county and their guidelines to adopt that tax relief program. And that tax relief program, as far as the county is concerned, is actually state mandated. And so they obviously have their rules and regulations on what applies or who can apply. And it is year to year. And so to your point, if something changed, a person that was able to apply for that successfully this year may not next year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Janine, we have this coming to the council. I couldn't see it on the calendar for action
Yes.
on this item. I couldn't
Yeah,
see which date we
it's
have
not
that.
gonna be until, that like the 18th of June, just to
Okay.
be at the end of because we have some other fees that we actually haven't been transmitted yet.
Okay.
We're trying to do all the fees.
Trying
at
to
the
do it
same
also
time.
those together. Okay. All right.
I don't know if this is you, Gabe, or just maybe it is. I thought, did we talk about maybe proposing or trying to look into maybe having that, I don't know, another word, sponsorship, like where people pay in to assist someone else? Does that make sense? Did we ever decide on that? I know we talked about it at some point, and I don't remember it ever moving forward.
So within city ordinance, there is a section regarding charitable contributions. And so at this point, no, there isn't an active way for people to do that through their utility bill. That's very common a lot of times. You can add money to your utility bill. It is something that we're aware of and we've looked into based on what our software is capable of. Outside of that, there certainly are other means whereby people can donate. But to answer your question, no, there isn't anything actively happening.
So is there a way for Ken to anonymously pay part of somebody's utility bill?
Yeah, we actually do have that happen. There are a couple of ways that can happen, either through our staff at the utility billing office. Also, you can do it online. You just need a couple of pieces of information. That's not quite as anonymous because you would need obviously the person's information to do it, but usually for people trying to do that, it's done through our utility billing staff. They can assist. They can look up the account and get it all set up and take the payment without divulging any personal information. Sort of thing.
And what office at the county does someone approach to get this a qualification for a discount?
Randy, I'm not sure if is that through the assessor or the treasurer?
The assessor.
The assessor's office?
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah. When there's an application, it's all online. You can go on right now and have an application.
I'll get you my information.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. I think that all for that. Great. Appreciate you being here. You're welcome. So we've got about 12 minutes or so. Janine, is that enough to get into this next item, or should we?
Probably not enough to end it, but I think you can start the
Get
discussion.
started with it. Just give us about another 7-minute presentation, and we'll pause and go continue after the other 2 meetings for video. This is a video, yeah.
You can go through the presentation and then, yeah, if we have discussion, we can.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. All right, so I'll go,
I know.
all right. So I'll go quickly through this. Normally, when in the past, we've brought you the budget and we've presented on our BDO lease revenue uses. Usually we'll just provide you what we're funding. But I thought it would be relevant this year to talk a little about the history of our BDO lease revenue with what's being proposed in the budget this year. And so I wanted to just give a little context and history about and projections of where that lease revenue is. So this graph here, we can see this includes actual lease revenue received from fiscal year 2013 until now, or fiscal year 23, and then it also shows what we're projecting for fiscal year 24 on out till 2058, which when we provide information on our DDOU lease revenue ordinance adjustments, we have a sheet that we broke it that we've gone out that far, and so I thought it was relevant to show you that graphic. But you can see just in the last 10 years the amount of growth that we've experienced in our lease revenue received from BDO. And so you can see that large change. And what we're projecting right now after meeting with Boiler, we're anticipating next year that revenue to be around $15 million. And then what our program in is about, we've got programming is about the increase each year after that. So that's that steady slope. It's really 5% inflation. I thought it'd be helpful. So this going back from fiscal year 2019 until now is a graph. I thought it'd be helpful to see how much money we've used of BDO lease revenue each year over the last 6 years and where it's gone to. So you can see here the dark area, that is funding that's gone into the CIP fund for projects, for critical project contingency, for arts, for the general plan update that we put some funding into, for the zoning ordinance update that we put funding into. There's been quite a few projects and things that have been funded from BDO lease revenue over the years. In fiscal year 21, there was a big drop with not knowing what was going to happen during that time. We had reduced down how much we were proposing to use that year in BDO lease revenue. So then the next year we held it. We weren't sure what would happen with sales tax and general fund wise, and so we held that those funds that year. And where sales tax continued to grow, the next year we had a decent amount of fund balance built up with BDO lease revenue. So that's why there's that huge spike in fiscal year 22. We were able to fund a lot of projects that year. I just wanted to give you a little bit of history. I went back and looked from 2007 till now, we have funded over $36 million worth of projects from BDO lease revenue, just BDO lease revenue, not any other sources. And then if you include what's proposed in the budget this year, it would be over $40 million. So over the last, is that 16 years, 17 years, 18 years?
But projects, do you mean CIP projects?
So that includes CIP projects, also including, we funded some golf projects, irrigation, so that includes that. It also includes funding that we used at the airport as well. That we used BDO lease revenue for that. So in total projects, capital improvement projects that we've done over the last 18 years, it's come from BDO lease revenue. The other colors on this graph, the tannish color, that is what we put in the RDA for various projects that have been funded over the last 6 years. The yellow is what has been funded in the general fund. So you can see for fiscal year 25, that is a bigger amount, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that is. So we're short on time. So this is what the projected uses would be based on. So the last was going back in time. Historically, this is what we're showing in the future. So as that revenue continues to grow, one of the things that we're proposing in this year's budget is a shift in the use of these funds, which includes a 12% transfer to the general fund. And so that's that blue category at the bottom. That's what that amount is. And then the part above that is the Marshall White debt service. So you can see where that falls off. So this is going from fiscal year 26 through fiscal year 58. The red area, that is the Wonder Block debt. So there's that portion. And then the other portions are smaller, but they include the Union Station property purchase, the $780,000 that's been talked about. There's also quality neighborhoods. There's a couple more years of that, the last 5 years that we've done. So there's 2 more years of that. And then the big blue portion, that would be what would be available to use for projects, whether it be CIP projects, RDA projects, whatever other needs. So you can see that area continues to grow over time as lease revenue increases, as well as some of the debts go past their time. This is the chart. Now it's kind of hard to read, but this is over the next 15 years, taking what we're projecting in BDO lease revenue, and then what the DDOU lease ordinance that we would transmit to you to propose to adjust, what items we would propose to have in there. The two that would be added would be the 12% general fund administrative transfer, as well as the Wonder Block debt service. The last time we amended that, we didn't have the Wonder Block payment schedule yet, so we had included that. So those two would be added to that ordinance update. But you can see some of the other things that are currently in there: the Marshall White Center debt payment, the CBD Mall debt payment, or monthly CBD Mall debt. Quality neighborhoods for 2 more years, the Union Station property purchase over the next 7 years, funding for arts, critical project contingency, and then also funding for community plan projects. I know we're short. I don't know if we want to stop here
we
and
pause here,
okay.
and then we'll go over the projected uses.
Okay, good stuff.
It's a good, yeah, good break. Any questions on so far on it? Any of that, or it's all pretty. Okay, thank you. All right, we'll adjourn here unless there's anything else. Right, so we'll adjourn here to our 6 p.m. meeting in a few minutes. Okay, welcome back. We are back in work session, and we'll invite Justin to come up to resume his presentation. Thank you for being here, Justin. And hopefully people online can hear us. And we're back. Oh, what the heck? Sorry.
Thank you for having me back again. Continue our discussion on the BDO lease revenue uses and sources. Where we were at in my slides was to go through and talk about what's proposed of the use of for next year.
Can you go back a slide
Sure will.
or two? Go back. So you know the blue there where it, it says the balance for CIP's RDA projects? That's already what's committed though, right?
No,
No.
this would be, so this is outside of what, so the commitments that we've made for debt payments, the proposed general fund administrative transfer, the Union Station property purchase, all these different items are is what would be that below bottom part. That blue part that grows is the excess revenue that we would be received that would be used for RDA projects, CIP projects, whatever would be proposed over those years. And so the thing I wanted to show there is over time, that balance continues to grow as far as the available funds to be able to do projects, continue to do projects.
Unless we have COVID and it goes down like we did.
Right. I don't want to be a graph snob, but if the lowest blue bar is 12%, shouldn't that have the same slope as the top line?
It
Or
does
is
a little
it-
bit. It
Feels
goes up a
like
little
it's
bit.
not
It,
quite.
it does, it's slightly, it's hard to tell with all the other
Okay.
colors, but it does.
You can see the little jogs.
Yeah.
Okay.
It does increase over time.
Is there any developable land still? That's BDO.
That I am not sure. I think there is.
Not much.
I don't know how much.
Maybe some.
There is. I don't know what percent.
Yeah, they're all shaking their head yes back there.
I think
Yeah.
90 acres.
There's no mics.
Mike's up.
They're up
Speak
here.
clearly.
There is space available on a lot, but there is still some opportunities.
And then, so this projection is just with what's currently built, or if that all built out?
Well, this is with what's currently projected, and then obviously we've built in a small growth that would be anticipated over time.
So it's already included in there.
There are also several, so the model with BDO is that they will finance the building. Once the debt is paid off, then it starts to cash flow and we start to split that. There are several constructed buildings out there that have not started to cash flow. They're still paying off the debt.
But that's in this projection?
No.
Oh, okay, that's what I was trying to. That was already.
This is a very conservative projection.
So once those cash flow, then you would see more increases.
Now that the mayor, I want to play devil's advocate, as I love to do. So if we're proposing to take out this much from BDO lease revenue perpetually, what stops us from not just taking more and giving the police a giant raise or hiring 10 more officers or whatever? I mean, what stops us from not, why wouldn't we just use more of it over time? Oh, sorry, did I steal your idea?
No, if you're devil's advocate, does that make me the devil?
No, no, I'm the advocate on behalf of the devil.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
I think that you guys make that decision. It's up to you.
Because I want to pay the public safety officers more. I'd like to get some more officers. So we want to find that money.
I mean, there's a lot to unpack in this whole thing, and that's why we wanted to have these meetings. I had an opportunity to unpack it all, but in my journey, I'm looking at general fund money. It's accounted for differently. There's no doubt about it. We've used it differently in the past. That's why we accounted for it differently. But the data that shows it, this fund has grown over time. This fund has proven stable and sustainable. And time has also showed us that the general fund needs support and it needs help. When we started this fund, and when we also started to adjust the general fund, dynamics have changed dramatically. The item has changed, our position and our momentum has changed. But also the public's willingness to support more change in the general fund through property tax revenue has changed. And another thing that changes is the demand on services. We continue to have more daytime service demands. We still have a lot of need for infrastructure, et cetera. But the ongoing expenses and ongoing revenue picture has got to be addressed, and it has to be addressed somewhere differently than just continually property tax, right? And I don't think we should. That's why I proposed the 1%. I don't want to give that up as an option because we have to be a sustainable city. But I don't want to continually put it on the backs of the people, especially if we have a revenue source that is over time proven to be sustainable. They can help with these ongoing costs.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, I get what you're saying, so why not just do more?
That's up to you. Let's do it. Just kidding.
No,
I would recommend more.
The general
Yeah, I think-
concept.
I think your question is, what was the rationale behind 12% versus, well, that's really.
There's a lot
kind
of
what
needs,
you're-
and we're hearing, we know that it's continual need for public safety, extra officers and additional fire stations. I mean, a whole bunch of things have just been listed, so.
Right. And Justin can share some details on how we arrived at 12%.
Yeah.
Right. I think the initial number, we kind of went off of what we were doing with utilities, but it's obviously a completely different scenario at 12%. But the big thing is we feel like it's a return on investment, what's happened out there. And so I think that's where that 12% initially started from. And then in looking at it, making sure that with the current commitments we have, with the debt for Wonder Block, the debt for Marshall White, that we still would have enough that we can continue to support the CIP program as well. The other issue we run into is having this revenue, this source has been fantastic for our CIP fund to be able to do as many projects as we have, but it also has created an issue as far as that's what I'm looking for.
Bandwidth?
Yeah, bandwidth, that's the word. There we go. So it's created an issue that way. And so if we continue to fund more and more projects without support from positions to do those projects, then that's an issue as well. And so.
Well, that's kind of my argument too, is people keep asking us, we're building more and more buildings and apartments, and we're the ones doing it, through the RDA, that we need additional support for that infrastructure, and where is that going to come from?
So if I may, while the mayor mentioned it, how many property tax increases have come to bear on our residents in the last 10 years? How many increases in 10 years? Truth of taxation.
From the city, just from the city,
City.
3, I think.
So Morgan City, 3. But then we've got the
Well, I've been here.
It's the school district.
school district and the county.
County,
Yeah,
all the tax
Yeah.
entities.
okay, but 3 from Ogden City.
One big one, which really just traded GO bond.
Exactly.
For-
One was,
So it was kind of flat, really.
It was
with
flat.
people. And then 2 other relatively small ones, I would say.
well, one we
Okay.
kept, we just kept the rate.
Right.
Right? One we just kept the rate, like we're doing, like we're
Yeah.
proposing this year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of them, I mean, it's a tax increase, but still, we just kept, it's a,
Right,
it's a rate increase, but the tax rate is the
Taxes.
same.
Right.
So.
But you know, what Lisa said is intriguing to me. How much of BDO is left to capture after we pay off all the debt? I mean, how much, what kind of a percentage are we talking about? We know? I don't know. Somebody knows.
What do you do?
Well,
The building.
Pay
yeah, how far
buildings.
back we gotta go before we're still paying
Cash
on
flow.
buildings
So what percentage?
instead of getting the money?
Oh, that's what you're saying.
I'm sorry, I
still
I don't know
think
how
that's
to.
the question one more time.
He's talking about the,
He's
what
talking
you
about
just
building
described
to-
between the build out and the cash flow.
Oh,
Yeah.
What's that delay in?
I have to ask the lawyer.
But it would be staggered, right? It's not all the same.
No,
Yeah.
One thing,
Based on,
Same time.
Yeah.
when it pays off. but-
and you know, how quickly they get it leased and, you know, the terms of that lease rate. The cost of the build out, there's a lot of
Yeah,
variables.
I'm just, I guess what I'm trying to wrap my mind around, and I don't think you need to give me a firm number, but is it another 4 million? Is it I don't know, is it 50,000? I don't know what it might be. Well,
Yeah, I think it would be interesting just to see a pro forma that's not, we're not gonna hold everyone to the fire on that, but just saying, okay, in the next 5 years, we'll expect that these buildings to be paid off and this is the rent that might be generated.
No, I think that we've got that somewhere.
I was gonna say, Boyer probably is.
Yeah.
Boyer probably has.
Perhaps if we had this 5-year financial plan.
Well, it's not in
Talking
any of
about
this
it.
stuff right now, which is.
No, it's just-
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
just take what out of these.
So if it's just be,
I've
in
been
addition
talking
to
about
that,
it,
it's
just,
doesn't.
So remember too, you guys are talking about, how long will it continue to grow? In terms from new development, but also we're talking about lease revenue. So over time, if there's a little bit of churn within the stock that we already built out, which we've seen at BDO. And if those lease rates adjust with the market, right? There should be some sort of track with inflation, so it should still have some built-in increase over time.
Yeah.
Which then would be a sustainable pathway and trend line with what we're countering, which is a sustained increase in the cost to deliver services, right? So it's not just about always having space to build out, it's about having the space that we have, making sure that it's fully filled up and that if there's turnover, that we're always keeping pace through our agreement with BDO and Boyer on the market rates, and that the market rates are keeping track, just like our inflation.
Yeah.
That's what, in my view, makes it a sustainable fund. And in addition to, we are piling, the more that we increase and the more that we build out, that's a great thing because it comes with more revenue, but we're piling more and more CIPs on the same number of people. We don't think that. We're going to bury our people.
Yeah.
And we already are. I'm watching the struggle every day.
How much of our CIP workload is done in-house versus by a contractor?
Mostly in-house. I mean,
I'm just kidding.
So we do contract a lot for external work, but it's not just that the contractor's doing the work, it's putting together the RFP to go out to bid, having the selection committee to evaluate those RFPs, having someone to manage that contract and making sure the work is done appropriately. So even when we do have a contractor on staff, it adds work.
it's a lot of work to manage a contract.
but we've been doing that for years, so.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I don't know that I would. We've been doing that and doing it fine for years, so I guess what's the change?
I would say that we're not really doing it fine.
I think you can see that as we bring the CIP quarterly report. And how many projects continue to be added that are not being over time completed. We have a lot of projects in process.
I wanted to take us to get to the dog park. I wanted to take us to get to the splash pad, and we're just getting to design on the splash pad. I've been talking about that for 3 or 4 years. It's not because there isn't a want in the administrative side. It's because when you look at the projects that have been funded that haven't continually carry over, it's a struggle on the staff side to keep up. And they're already falling behind. And then our BDO revenue is increasing, and then we're adding more CIPs to the top, and they're having a hard time. I'm glad it doesn't look like it, but I see it working alongside them. We had this exact conversation in the budget retreat. So.
Sorry, I have a question on this page.
Yes.
So. It looks like we'll just take FY 2025. There's $15 million available in revenue. That's what we're saying. After everything that we proposed, my question is, because in the packet, it said there was 15 million and we're taking 2 million from what we didn't use last year to make it 17 million. And I couldn't tell do we always budget the full amount? And then here it looks like we don't budget the full amount because there's a balance of 5 million left.
We do our best. So, it's a pro forma budget. We're guesstimating we'll have 15 million by the end. Last year, we estimated, I think, 14 million. We ended up having 2 million.
So that's my question. So we do our best to budget all the money that's coming in from BDO every year.
The next year.
To use the next year.
Yeah.
So we don't say I guess that raises another question with me is, do we say, okay, we set such and such aside every year just in case, or we keep, we only use 90% of what's coming in, or whatever that is. And I know we're not going down to the exact penny, I get that. But I guess I didn't really pay attention before this. And we have this lump and we just use it all.
Yeah, and maybe I misunderstood Bart, and maybe I misread. But I understood the reading to be, we're spending money that was collected in the previous fiscal year. So we know the amount that we
Yes.
have
Well, that was
available.
gonna be my question,
to
because I think
spend.
it's probably a fourth quarter payment or something that you're guessing on.
So we start this budget process in January. So at that time, we've got 2 distributions from BDO. We can true it up a little bit in March where we maybe have another distribution by then, but the amount of time it takes us to get the budget ready to submit to you, we're still.
I got you. It's not like it's sitting there and
Yeah.
it's 15 million. Let's divide it up. Okay. Thanks for clarification.
Yep. So we anticipate by the end of this year, we'll have 15 million from this year.
Okay.
And then that 6 million or 5 million that we show as the balance. So these items are the ones that from the ordinance that we would, the DOU ordinance.
Yeah,
These would be the commitments.
Commitments.
And then everything else is where we would have 50%, we need to, at least 50% needs to go towards capital. And the other part can be used for operations or capital. And so that's what that rest of that balance is used for.
And then on top of this, there's interest income into this fund. That's not included.
Is there any kind of a line in the sand that you would think is where we start to make that fund unhealthy by making, too much encumbered perpetually rather than one time?
I think that's just a judgment call and priorities. The Marshall White Center was a big priority. And so the council felt like it was important to do that for the community. The Wonder Block was one of our, the big stones that CED wanted to see accomplished through the Make Ogden plan. We have another big stone that's going to be coming up Union Station. I mean, I don't know that it's bad to
Yeah.
not appropriate a certain point because that's gonna be expensive for the city to do that, so
Yeah, thanks for acknowledging that. That's in my notes.
What approximately is the interest income?
I'm not sure here today if we know the total amount off the top of our heads, so.
Is it close to the 1.8 million?
No, there's more money in the general, more
Okay.
cash in the general fund than there is in this fund, so.
Okay, I'm not a financial person, so I give you that caveat, but isn't there a way that, I mean, we get the interest income, but is there a way to gain more money off of that money while it's sitting around?
So we actually utilize an investment advisor, Morton.
Mm-hmm.
There are limitations to what we can do with public funds. So Morton advises us on investments and doing the best we can with.
I totally trust that. I was just curious.
Well, right
No
now,
idea what I'm talking
fixed
about.
interest rates as high as they are, that's why we're seeing the interest
they're
income
really big
on the other
interest
account was what, 750,000 more than the prior year, so. You know. All right, should we move on? Are we okay? But there's a lot to discuss and that's
Yeah.
not
More information
necessarily,
needed, yeah.
we're not moving on to for good. We're just, you know, this
We
is.
can come back to
We
it.
can certainly, we'll be coming back to all of these discussion points. But I think you have about 4 more slides in your presentation.
Yes, the rest of the slides are just what we're proposing to use the funds for next year. So the ordinance / agreement requirements that we would, with the amended ordinance would include, it would be the 12% transferred to the general fund of the 1.8 million. The Marshall White injunction bond payments, again, the ordinance is written right now to cover that full debt payment, which we would split it between going to the general fund and the CBD mall area, because that's where we have that debt at. And then there's also the 250,000 for a couple more years for the CBD mall area until that area is expired and that debt's paid off. This will be the 4th year of the 5 years on the quality neighborhoods. This is the second go around of the second 5-year cycle of the quality neighborhoods. So that'll be something in the next year that will be looked at again and discussed. There's the Union Station land purchase agreement that's paid back over 7 years. We did the first year in fiscal year 24, so this will be the 2nd year of payment. And then the last is the Wonder Block debt. That amount actually would be higher. And as you saw in this schedule here, it's closer to 3.4 million. But from the pre-development funds and things that we've done previous, we have some excess in the continental area in the tune of 1.4 million. So the amount needed from BDO lease revenue next year is only 1.8 instead of the full, because we already have some funds in the continental area to cover that debt. So that total amount is just under 7.6 million. And then our capital projects and arts, there's the 102,500 for the arts and the arts maintenance. The ordinance also specifies that we put money into the general fund for arts grants, but a couple of years ago, we were able to fund that through the general fund, and we just kept it that way instead of transferring from BDO lease revenue. So that money has not been coming from BDO lease revenue. And then as far as appropriations into the CIP fund, there's 4.3 million, and I've got a list of what those are, and they're also in the packet. There's 100,000 that would be going to the airport fund. This would be the match to go along with the AIP money from the FAA. And then the golf fund, 390,000. This is for their irrigation project, as well as there's a new project in the golf fund to help with their facilities. Just their focus has been with the irrigation out there, and there's a need for improvements to some other facilities. So we're proposing a small amount there, and then also 150,000 into the CIP fund as a critical project contingency. Non-CIP, so this is the other.
Can I ask a couple questions about CIP first?
Yes.
I'm just looking at the list of projects. This kind of goes back to my previous question about the restricted fund for the, I can't remember what it's called, restricted fund for like streets and sidewalks. So there's about 3 or 4 projects in this list that are sidewalks or streets. So why wouldn't we use the restricted fund?
So we do, so this is only the BDO lease revenue portion of the funds going into the CIP fund. There's actually quite a bit more of our active transportation and DNC funds. I think it's 1.7 million in DNC funds for projects and 1.8 million in active transportation for projects.
Okay, so it's
And so
using
those-
up that reserved account also.
Well, no, so the 1.8 is active transportation that we're projecting for next year, where we're gonna put all into the CIP fund. And then the 1.7 in B and C, $1 million of that is the from fund balance.
Okay,
The other 700,000 would be revenue from next year that we're gonna, and those are going to the 20th Street project, our ENO 06 street construction project, our perpetual project, our city sidewalk CIP.
I'm very impressed with your memory, by the way.
I know.
Okay, you don't have to tell me that, but I just.
So, yeah, so there's quite a bit of money programmed using those two fund sources. That's a great question though. So as far as non-CIP projects, so again, this is what would be transferred out of BDO lease revenue. So we've got 250,000. This is the debt portion of the 2023 RDA sales tax that's in the MBA. We're proposing that we get transferred to that new parking and mobility fund, and then we would do a payment out of there to the MBA for that debt payment. We also are proposing 600,000 to also go into that new fund, just as a backstop as we get things up and running with the new parking and mobility and everything there. We also were proposing another 235,000 to go to the general fund to help with the general plan update to pay for staffing. We had committed doing 2 years of those funds so they could hire extra planners as they're going through this process. We also, and that cut off on me, I apologize, 100,000 that we would transfer into the general fund to help fund a grant writing position that we will use for public services and CED. Police and fire currently have one, and it's been a very successful position for them. They've been able to go out and get a lot of money. And so our hope is that we can do the same thing with both our public services and CED departments as well. There's also the 1.3 million that would go into track line for Swift, 550,000 for Weaver County parking structure. The interfund loan amount that we would put into the 25th Street, so then we can begin to pay that interfund loan that's owed to CBD Mall area from the 25th Street area. And then the last two items are debt payments, so paying off the Rite Aid balloon, and then the St. Anne's payment for next year. And then the last thing is just the list of projects. So again, these are all the projects that are funded with just BDO funds next year. Some of them actually have other funding sources as well. So the total amount going into them may not be this, it may be more. But that total amount again is 4.3 million. And if you have any specific questions on any projects in particular, that is everything I have in regards to the BDO lease revenue.
I have a question on the citywide lights, electrical. We've got Justin here. I believe that not all of the streetlights are owned by Ogden City, and some of them are owned by Rocky Mountain Power. And so is this addressing that issue of maybe hitting on some of those lights that aren't getting replaced because you don't own them?
Yeah, so this is not. This is specifically dealing with the lights that we do own and the wiring to those lights. So it's making sure that we have them located properly, that we're watching out for them so they don't get hit by contractors digging into the road, and making sure that all the wiring is complete and our stuff is working.
This project originally started as just the downtown area. And as they've gotten into it, it's expanded to being a citywide.
Yeah.
But I would love to talk a lot more. We probably don't have time tonight to talk about the street lights for the city. So we've been working on this a lot.
More about that as well. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions?
A lot to digest for sure. Thank you.
Chair, can I just make a comment?
Yeah.
To close? I just want to tell you that you're asking great questions. They're questions that I asked, they're questions that others asked. I've had months to do it. It was just a journey for me, and I respect your journey. I respect all the questions you've asked. They're smart and responsible. There's just no doubt about it. So
Thank you.
if there's anything the staff and I can do to help along the way, just let us know. Thanks for putting so much thought into this.
All right. Thank you,
Chair, may I-
Justin.
may
Oh,
I
yeah,
make
go
a
ahead.
comment? So this thing is amazing. This is the goose that's laying the golden egg in Ogden City. And it just reinforces in my new life as a city council person, the importance of economic development in Ogden City. And what we really ought to be doing in tandem with looking for ways to constructively invest this money for us is how do we create another BDO now? Okay, I like all the projections and all of that, but what this additional money being taken out above the line will do is reduce the money going to all of those below the line because they're all governed by a percentage. So our budget for CIP will be reduced by a factor commensurate with the above the line obligation. I have a question about how many of the things that fall under non-CIP projects and expenditures are really not flexible. There's a lot of that there that I'm going to guess is obligated and might as well be above the line. Okay, so I love the caution, the cautious optimism around the projections, but we've got things other than just more build out and growing lease revenues to look at. We've got competition to look at. And our own county is working to come online with an inland port that will be competition for everything that happens in Ogden City or comes online. Or the Freeport Center, I think, is expanding. So we've got competition in the marketplace, and that doesn't mean that we're going to be on a glide path that's going up all the way throughout this project. And then Lisa mentioned this too, and this is maybe my last comment, is, and we got market downturns and to anticipate in addition to competition, but we've also got Union Station, and we've got to have some projections around what kind of expense will come with that debt. And I would like to believe that that's going to come sooner rather than later. We've got to get that off the ground and moving in the right direction. And that means obligating the city to some debt to get that going. Or we lose momentum on that project. And we may lose investors on it and people on that because time is money to those that are bringing development dollars to the fore. So those are my concerns around all of this. And once things drop into a general fund, that black hole just swallows it up. And it's real easy then to lose track of that money when it was earmarked for police and or fire and not police or whoever it was earmarked for. It's just in the general fund and we start from scratch every year and we forget what that was for. So those are my thoughts around moving this money into the general fund. And I think maybe we need to open up a bigger conversation around property taxes and what that looks like to create the kind of money we need to compensate our people properly.
That's where you want to go.
I'm not saying that's where we end up, but I think it's worth the conversation for me in learning.
Yeah, no, I think it's a valid point, and like we're not making any final decisions tonight. It's just good to explore and kind of come to grips and feel, how does this feel? How does this decision feel? How does that decision feel? And for a long time, if we've heard from our police and our fire that they are hurting, that we do need to do some things there, and we just how are we going to do it? That's that we got to maybe be creative at it, or we maybe look at turn over all the stones and see what we can come up with. So I tend to feel like if we have to sacrifice a few projects here and there to generate some additional revenue for employees, and that maybe that's the way to go rather than putting it on the backs of the taxpayers. I don't know. I think that just something to be thinking about for sure.
Yeah, and I just wanted the mayor and the administration to know my thinking is that,
Yeah.
as we enter these early stages of this conversation.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah.
I like the idea that nothing's off of the table, you know, kind of like even this idea was off the table previously too, so. Just put everything on the table that we can consider and then we can push away the things that definitely don't feel right.
Right. Good point.
I've always kind of, you use the term the golden goose, and that's kind of the way I've always kind of seen BDO. I was on the planning commission when the base for use thing was going on, and we were talking about the huge amount of debt we were gonna encumber to refit that for its current use, and we were all worried about that. We didn't worry that long when we finally discovered how great this thing was gonna be for Ogden. How much revenue and money that it gives to us for doing CIPs and other things. The idea that, you know, one time versus ongoing money. I try to put things in my own realm, you know, my own family budget kind of thing. And every time I got a raise, if I ran out and bought a bigger house, I didn't help myself. I had a bigger house, but that was all I had, and I was always hurting for money. And I really that's, so philosophically, that's where I really struggle with turning this into one-time stuff. Not that this is using it all that way, but it's so seductive to continue to do it until it's gone, until it's finally all used up. Except for new growth that the increases that naturally come, but so are our expenses gonna naturally grow also. That's why, it's a philosophical thing as much as anything for me. And I get what you're saying, yeah, we got have people to do the CIP projects. So I kind of, that resonates a little. I just wonder where is the line that we quit telling ourselves, well, the next bite is okay. We gotta find a place where this just doesn't, we just don't pass it. Or we're gonna find ourselves with, we will have killed the golden goose.
I would encourage another question, what's the alternative? And where is the alternative?
That is the question, and that's where we struggle, I think.
Right, and new growth obviously is the goal for new growth and revenue. New growth doesn't happen if something's not built. If something's not built, we don't have people to build it. We've had a lot of projects right now, and that's been a big focus for CED, is finishing a lot of things right now. Many of those don't actually pay because there's TIF. So where's the alternative? Are we gonna back off on TIF so we're not incentivizing new growth? Are we gonna back out on this? And are we gonna put it on the taxpayers? We're gonna do it. Like, what is the alternative?
Right, Councilmember, what do you got a comment?
It's not an easy choice, I get it.
Yeah.
I mean, to piggyback on that, that's been my biggest issue with this whole thing is at first, when I first saw this, I was just scared to death to even go down that road. And so then you start thinking, well, maybe 5% is okay. Maybe I'm okay with 5%, but I agree. I think once you get that foot in the door, 5% goes to 7, 7 goes to 10, 10 goes to 12, 12 goes to 4. Like it makes me nervous, very nervous. And I understand that we're I understand that Ogden City presents unique challenges and that we have to be creative, maybe more creative than other entities and other cities, but and I don't know, just don't know if I'm ready to be this creative yet, but I don't have to make that decision tonight, so we're good. But yeah, I think it's great what Councilmember Chaburka said too. I think it's great that we do. If we continue to do the same things we've always done, then we're just going to continue to get the same results. But so I appreciate the idea of expanding our view, expanding our scope, and trying to figure out where can we get some money, where can we get sources. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the effort taken, and I appreciate Justin helping us out. It's a big one. But yeah, that's my biggest fear is once you start, because this has been I mean, such a blessing. And it blows my mind that it was even, I wasn't there, but yeah, that it was even considered, like, had to be debated, right? That should we do this? Because it's, you drive around and people ask about stuff and it's all, I mean, not all, most is a direct byproduct of our BDO and what we've been able to do throughout the city because of that. So it's such a blessing to our city.
So one of my thoughts is to look at a percentage off the balance. Instead of having the general administrative fund at the front end, have it at the back end. Because in theory, with the Wonder Block, it's supposed to generate business and, you know, and so hopefully we'll see more coming out of that. The CBD mall debt will expire, but we'll have Union Station property stuff that Lisa even mentioned. So I'm wondering if we could look at something on the back end as opposed to on the front. Because then that gives us some latitude as well to maybe we don't have enough money at the end of at the balance, but we to do all the CIP projects that we want to do or something. So I wonder if there's some other way to look at it than just at the top of the fold at the bottom. And accomplish the same thing. I mean, I'm not trying to say, but it gives us that as we start to see Union Station go and, you know, all the things that's supposed to be happening because of what we're already doing from the BDO stuff, that maybe we'll have more money coming in too. So it'll help bolster the general fund.
That's a good thought. Hey, Dave, where do you see that next BDO project being? I mean, I know the government doesn't have any more bases in our city that they're gonna turn over, but.
Well, I've heard rumor that the fairgrounds is something that might move. We've got an airport that's in the red. And
We got a golf course.
How's the red?
Not in the red anymore.
oh yeah, the golf course is above water. I don't know. We've got very little land. You know, I think there was a little hint that maybe there was property to the west, but that wasn't very warmly received either. What was that, 5 or 6 years ago? That really startled the community. So there isn't a whole lot of space unless there's something to annex. Because Mayor at Slaterville have some property we can annex.
An old Amazon building, right?
Maybe-
A new Amazon building.
Maybe Carrie Wayne's property. I
Maybe
don't
we'll
know.
get an extra Amazon.
I'm giving the mayor niptions over here.
It just caused a lot of work for me. So
It'll be in the paper
we're
tomorrow.
not,
I don't know.
we're not expanding into the nature center, we're not expanding into the fairgrounds, we're not gonna take property from another city, to pay the bills. Hopefully that saved me a few weeks of work.
Rich asked the question.
Well, I just thought, well, hey, you know, maybe you've turned up some idea. I don't know what it would be.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
But
You think about the strengths and weaknesses of each community, right? So some communities have a much more affluent population base, right? So that maybe they generate additional income that way. How many communities have a BDO in Utah?
how many have a historic downtown?
How many? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so how many have as many, tax-free properties, with schools and government and all these. So we have some strengths. We also have some weaknesses, but BDO is probably one of our biggest strengths. So how does that help balance out some of these things? That's kind of where my mind is can that be used to help balance out some of the weaknesses that we have in the community, like, weaknesses or challenges or however you can phrase that.
Their liabilities, we've got aged infrastructure, we don't have the socioeconomics that these other cities have. Every time I go to St. George, I drive around and I'm like, I don't know, like, remember we were joking about when we were down, I'm like, they got perfect sidewalks on both sides of the street, every freaking foot. Like it's all brand new, I'm driving on the road, it's perfectly smooth. And I know I'm driving on top of pipes that are brand freaking new, right? And you go to the parks and they're unbelievable because they've got the revenue. We don't have that revenue. We don't have that population, but yet we are the face of this county. We are the capital of this county and we get the pressures of everybody from the county and beyond. And we have to provide all those services too. That's a tremendous liability and an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
But this is the golden goose. This has been unbelievable. Like, we wouldn't be in this opportunity that we are today without the people that made these decisions. Thank goodness that they did. Union Station ain't gonna pencil for a long time. That's gonna be a long-term project. We're talking about, we're still in the first phase of planning. We still have a second phase of planning. We haven't got to the point where we talk about a capital stack. But if we're relying on this fund for that capital stack, we are hosed. We are gonna have to look everywhere with every partner at every level to pull that one off, including private equity, local from us, county, state, federal, matches galore, everything. The Wonder Block, it's finally coming out of the ground. Money ain't coming with it. We gotta pay the debt burden before we get to a point where we've got revenue coming, right? Every RDA or CRA that we have, we're using that as TIF to create the momentum, which means that's revenue that doesn't come back, right? At some point, we have to capture some revenue to keep up. And in this case, we've got public safety struggling, right? We're losing people for basic services. We've got to find a way to provide for those services, and we've got to find a way to stabilize our staff and our team and keep pace. We've made some really hard calls in the past, really hard. And just like with BDO, it took some courage to make it happen, right? Super glad that we did it. And I don't want to lose pace, but every city is going through this, and no city more than we are because of the liabilities that Chair Ritchie mentioned. You get to a point where are we going to go next, right?
Okay, so we have a lot to talk about, a lot to think about. We have Fred also here, Fred Philpotts joining us. And so sorry I think we definitely, we have a lot of smart people in this room, and I think we've got a lot of cool ideas and a lot more to come up with. So let's go ahead though and close this discussion. Maybe we'll pick it up. I know we'll pick it up at a later time. And so, because we definitely haven't come to any final decision for sure. So, but at this time, we can invite Fred to come on up and talk about the proposed, our second favorite. Yeah. Thinking of another
Next increase.
Yeah. The other thing that keeps me up at night, the water rate amendments to our 36-inch water canyon line. Welcome,
You
Fred.
like listen to.
Yeah, everything.
You're welcome, Fred. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to be here.
You have a.
We'll try not to be as hard on you.
Yeah.
as we-
Follow that.
So do you have a presentation or just? Okay.
No, don't do that.
How big is it?
That's
You
not
can
much.
share
I
with
got a
him.
jump drive.
Well,
Yeah.
if you
If
join
you've got a
the,
jump drive, that's.
so I sent you an email to join the Zoom meeting.
Oh, okay.
So if you just want to join the Zoom meeting and then just share your screen from there, you can get into your.
Could have kept talking.
Sorry.
It was a circular conversation at that point.
Well, there's a lot to think about.
I was gonna come over and that's what the setup was. I apologize.
Start to.
Pull things out.
We still streaming on
Yeah.
Facebook? Yeah.
It kind of goes back to the budgeting.
Well, I have a minute.
The savings
Did I see it on-
plan, you spend, rather than spending every month, figure out, okay, what else can I say? Yeah, it just, that's switch.
Let's see. Yes.
Okay.
3:00.
3:00.
Right. Yeah, and we're not budgeting anymore.
Blame them. Right.
All right.
Yeah. Over the next couple of years.
So what will that bring? What was that?
Paramount. Oh, no.
Okay, raising a lot of money. That's what I'm doing right now.
Good.
Start knocking doors when I get back from vacation. Italy. Too bad for me.
We feel so bad for you. It's just,
You better feel bad for me. It's gonna be really.
Where are you going
it's
again?
so rough.
Venice,
Venice, just
just
Venice.
for 3 weeks.
Just for 3 weeks.
Yeah, I'm going-
Matthew's already there enjoying life.
Well, it's teaching,
Well, he's
but
asleep.
he's enjoying life.
He's probably asleep right now, right?
Yeah.
It's like 2 a.m. or something.
I'm going to the Alps.
That would be
July.
wonderful. Yeah. That's a great place to go in July.
So.
You don't want to be in Venice in July. It's a big
I
butt.
kind of think going to Lake Powell's a big deal.
Yeah. Bear Lake.
Yeah, you're going up Bear Lake.
Fine, man, it's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
My wife's getting for an Alaskan cruise.
Hi,
Oh, nice.
I talked
This
to you
little
that have gone
village
in the
here.
last. They look.
Like.
I really want to see this. Glaciers.
Cool.
I'd love to see that.
Amazing. Look at that
I
water.
know.
When we were down in Argentina, we went to a glacier.
Oh, that looks
Oh
amazing.
my gosh, and one just, it is loud and it is,
Yeah.
it
Right here.
was like,
I'd like to be in a kayak.
well, so they have
So the
big
wave
boats.
flows.
Yeah, so they have these huge boats and they won't let them get it too close because it, when it goes down, it goes.
Oh my
down.
God.
Place is a lot of water.
And it's
Yeah, not big quite.
Nancy
as
showed me this
same
video
Where I am, but also.
one cabin
A little
and
bit
it
more.
went down and the bottom came up. And it was
good
just
to see.
really beautiful, dark blue.
How it flipped over.
Uh-huh. It was
She sent me
cool.
last Tuesday.
Food.
Was there like anybody on
First,
Facebook?
Mm-hmm.
Other than Nancy?
Nancy watches our work session.
Yeah.
She does, she's like, are you bored? What?
All right, Kim, we'll
Okay,
talk about it
we're-
when I-
we are
oh,
back.
She's winding down and I.
You're like.
Okay.
So we asked Fred to come back because I'd heard from several of you that you had some ideas about maybe doing something differently than 4% per year for, eternity. And so I thought that maybe Fred could, with his model here, could show you the impact of, as you say, ripping the Band-Aid off and maybe doing something bigger up front and what that would do to later years. So maybe you guys, if you want to throw out some numbers or.
29.
29%, let's do it.
So I think 8 was the number that I'd heard.
Well, I had asked last time, what if we just did 8 right up front, and then
Yeah.
you said, well, that would decrease going forward.
Let me
We'll see.
stop this and actually see if I can just share.
Oh, great. It's
Yeah.
messing with it again, Bridge.
Yeah, let's,
I think we're clear now.
so I'm gonna.
You know where you work.
Yeah.
Truth. Okay, so let me.
I was looking in there, but it doesn't seem like they don't, I don't think they work.
Okay, so I've got on my desktop where I move around, I'm gonna keep this side. So you can see the performance metrics. And again, when we talk about rates, as I recall in our last discussion, there were really three elements that were kind of thrown around. One is structural discussion of how do we change the actual structure of the rate, or do we do that? One is the rate at which we infuse new revenue into this, and then managing these. The third is managing these performance metrics. This model does not do anything with the first element, which is structural changes to your rate. We can do that, but we haven't been doing that. You did that exercise many years ago, and that takes a little bit more time and brain power to go through all of that, right?
And just to clarify, when you say structural, you mean actually what's in the base rate as opposed to what
Yes.
they're paying
So,
for?
yeah, how do you charge the base rate to what customers? What goes into your usage rate? What do those tiers look like? Do you have different customer classes within the rate? All of that can be manipulated, and we have the ability to do that. It just requires additional analysis and data collection. And I often do that with customers. Some of that is evaluating your risk portfolio. So if you have more revenue coming from your base rate, that's less risky, right? It doesn't rely on fluctuations in weather patterns and usage. The more revenue you generate from your usage rates, you have a little more risk associated with that, but it allows for maybe you to promote more conservation measures because you're paying more as you use more. So there's a whole set of discussion that needs to happen around that structural side. Again, this model just deals with revenue sufficiency. How do we phase in new revenue and manage these performance targets relative to cash on hand and your debt coverage ratio, while considering huge infrastructure projects, debt service, changes in your operating expense, all of those variables. So that's really what this is measuring now again. So I just want to help maybe limit that discussion to what the model can do. And then if we need to expand this model, then we can do that with additional data. So what I'll do right now, just to give.
You're the only one that bring it up.
I'm not gonna bring it up.
Now I know what it was.
The folks that have secondary versus.
You just brought it up.
Yeah, sorry, I know what you're talking about.
I think
I just want to make sure I knew what he said.
So what I'll do right now is I'll just zero out everything in this model other than what we're proposing for. Well, I'll zero everything out. So right now the model is built such that I have 23 actuals and prior year actual data in the model. I bring in 2024 budgeted numbers with the help of staff. We refine that 2024 number. And then we project through from 2025 through 2030. The model goes beyond that, but we don't have a lot of confidence in the model beyond that. And as you know, it's actually any given year that changes. You just talked about the BDO and changes and how that fluctuates. And it's the same with these types of models. Sometimes something comes along, whether that's inflation or a huge capital investment that blows everything up. So what we typically do, just modeling 101, when we start looking at parameters, we start with a baseline, which is do nothing, and say, if we keep our rates consistent to 2024 numbers, what happens? If we take in everything that we've programmed into the model, as you can see here, in this cash reserve, we fall off the cliff. So essentially, we don't have enough in our model to account for inflation, the growth, the natural growth in your expenditures, and the new capital improvements and debt service that we're layering into this model. So then it's a matter of how do we structure that, and that's.
So is that, if we do nothing right now, that's what will happen?
Yes, if I zero everything out, so no inflationary increases And
Oh,
no,
we do an inflation.
yes, I zeroed everything out. I just said, okay,
What if you keep the inflationary increase though?
yes, so if I zeroed just our rate increase, you can see that's, whoops, that's not zero out everything.
That looks really bad.
So we don't go
No,
negative,
that looks worse.
but this is adjusting, so here, we'll just have to watch that, but that's why I've got the days here. What this represents here, the 78. Again, this is saying how much cash do we have relative to our operating expenditures? So can we cover a year's worth of our expense? That doesn't include capital or debt service, but we cover our, just kind of our baseline with the cash reserves that we have. No entity really does that, right? You don't turn off the faucet and have no revenues there, but it's a way for you to measure, again, the risk within your enterprise fund, and rating agencies will often look at this to say, how secure are you? So if I turned off, I turned that off for fiscal year 25 as well. So I just kind of turned off all rate increase. We just had inflation baked into that. You can see here, we don't stay above our target. So that's when I start looking at it saying, okay, our base policy was, let's keep up with inflation to just have our Ogden's formula relative to your municipal cost index and construction cost index. That's our baseline. Yeah.
Sorry, can the minimum standard, the 365 or 1 year cash reserve, who establishes that standard? Is that?
So that's a policy that Ogden has established. Where that comes from is, what's that?
10 years ago, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, it's been a long time ago.
We didn't used to have it.
Yeah.
Right, so I didn't know if we were prompted to add it because of other things.
So that comes from, typically when you go to issue debt, rating agencies will evaluate your specific enterprise fund, and they have metrics relative to that specific security. And then 365 days is a level that minimizes your interest cost. So if you go out to borrow, then you receive a better interest rate. So Ogden made that choice many years ago to create a more secure, sustainable fund that reduces that interest risk as you look into the future. So the lower that number, if we went to 150 days or 90 days,
The higher the debt rate.
the higher the interest rate.
Yes.
Some entities are okay with that because they're not going to issue debt, or they have the perception that they're not going to issue debt into the future. And so that becomes less important to them. Ogden, due to your capital investment needs historically and projected into the future, debt has been a tool that has been necessary for you to utilize, which is why that's been set at that higher level to reduce that interest cost.
Thanks.
And it's worked. I mean,
Yes.
we're much better,
Yeah.
not financially, but when we go out for bonding to get debt,
Yeah.
our ratings are way better than they were.
We got a lot of.
Yeah, than they were when I first got here, so
Yeah.
cool. That's great.
So again, this was, I kind of took 25, the proposed increase, the 4% off of the fiscal year 25 number. If I put that back in there, you can see that helps. What this illustrates is that concept of upfront increases. In most cases, structuring a rate or increasing rates upfront has the long-term benefit of reducing rates in the long term. Thank you. Because you're compounding that benefit before you actually need the revenues. So when I work with entities, we will look at that scenario saying, okay, what happens if we pull everything up front? How will that change the potential rate forecast? So what I'll often do is look at, again, I'm putting back in the 4%. That's what we had presented previously, which was about a 4% rate increase with 3% inflationary increase, or a cumulative or total increase of 7% each year about. So that was kind of the baseline that we presented last time that kept us slightly above the 365-day target. So one other way to evaluate this is to then remove that and say, okay, what happens if I thought we know this. Is to remove that, those future 4% increases. Again, now in the model, I just have the 7% in year one, fiscal year 25, and then 3% inflationary increases thereafter. So I removed any future rate increase. You can see we dropped below our target. Now we can play around with getting back to that 410, which was our baseline. And saying, okay, what would we have to do to get there? I could goal seek this, but I'm just guessing right now. So we're at some around 14% increase up front. So that's somewhere around there. So rather than doing 7% every year, it's essentially structuring in a 17% increase in year one with inflation, and then just inflationary increases thereafter. So 3% in subsequent years. So total increase year one, 2025 in the model is 17%. And then it's back down now to 3% instead of 7% every year. So again, that by pulling that forward, instead of doing 4% every year for the period through 2030, well, that's actually, I still have 2030 there. So it's maybe 15%. I had a 4% to 2030. So 15% instead of that 4% every year. So that's what it looks like if we were to suck all that up front.
And that would eliminate the.
Yes, it could. Yeah, the 4% future years.
Okay.
Yes. So one thing to, yeah.
Bob, that 17% still remains though.
Every year.
Yeah, so it's an upfront 17 to 18% increase that you're now generating every year, because the next year you don't pull that out of the
You
rates.
don't pull it back out.
Yeah,
It's still in there, so you're
yes,
putting it on.
and that's the key word. It compounds every year, which is why it's beneficial in the system, because you now generate that upfront, mitigate shortfalls sooner, and then you collect that every year moving forward.
However, the 4% every year compounds the increase every year. So you're doing
Yes.
4% on 4%.
Yeah.
And then
Yes.
4% on the 8 something percent. So
Yes.
the question is, what would cost the citizens more money?
So that's a good question. When I ran this and I assumed that a water bill was $100, and we're gonna move a 7-point-some-odd% increase through time, compounding each of 5 years, and that $100 becomes $142.17 by the end of 5 years.
5 years.
Okay, now I think, Fred, and you play with this a lot every day, and I don't. So if you front load this thing at 17%, what's that bill look like in 5 years? Is it gonna be the same, or it's gonna be greater? Yeah?
No, it should be less. If you do the upfront increase, your long-term bill will be less.
So, because you're taking it in the chin on the front end of the.
Yes,
check.
exactly.
Okay,
And that's for most entities, that is the case, that if you pull it forward, your long-term rate is reduced because of that. You experience the compounding revenue up front versus the compounding rate increase over
down
time.
the line, right? Okay.
So that's the trade-off, is you take it on the chin right now or pull off the Band-Aid in hopes of saving money in the long run. So what I'll caution on that is a couple of elements. First, you're now putting all of the impact of that rate increase on the ratepayers today. Now, future ratepayers will also join that pool, but it does pull it forward, and the customers now are maybe paying a little bit of a disproportionate impact. They could perceive as that. The other element is obviously that's challenging, right? To do that, to do substantial increases or propose substantial increases in a single year, rather than gradual rate increases every year. And then the other element is, and staff may be punching me on the chin on this one, but it's difficult to control expenditures or project expenditures, right? To know what the future brings. And so I've seen entities essentially come in and say, okay, let's do all of that up front. And then something happens like this project where you have a huge need that results in a change to the rate. You just can't get around it, right? That we have to do something with these rates. Well, it's very difficult when you just, a couple of years before did a 20% increase and then a couple of years later have to say, oh, wait a minute, we've got to come back and raise rates again. That's a little easier to absorb when those rate increases are structured every year. So we're saying, okay, we did instead of 7% or 3%, it's got to be 10% this year, and so it's always kind of changing and adjusting. So that's kind of a trade-off, right? If you try to pull it all up front, then you make changes, it can create some political risk, so to speak, or challenges.
And in addition to this, and I'll look for correction and looking for verification on this. So by the time we reach 40 years, we will have paid about $215 million for this project with the money we borrow and the interest that we pay on it. After 5 years of this utility increase, we will have collected about $10 million against this $215 bill. So really, we're kicking the can down the road. We're going to start with something. And in 5 years, it's going to be addressed again because the debt isn't going to be gone. It still needs to be paid.
Yeah, and some of that has to, the point of the debt is it amortizes it equally, right, over the life of that transaction. It allows your rates to gradually grow to catch up to that. Say, okay, now we can balance the equation, but you're right, for the next 40 years, the useful life or the amortized life of that transaction, you're paying towards that. And it now, you now have to reserve all of that revenue to help pay that debt service. So some of it is, we've tried to structure the debt so that as you have existing debt falling off, that now you're introducing new debt to balance the equation out. But there are, as we look into the future, talking about that, kicking the can down the road, there will be additional expenses, right? As you look at your capital improvement needs and inflation, all of that will impact this fund. And so I guess to have this, I don't want a misconception that if you take action now and pull it all forward, that will eliminate the need for future action. That's unlikely, right? Relative to just changes in cost. And essentially it may help you ride the wave for a couple of years on that increase, but then post 2030, we may have to get back into it and say, okay, what do we have to do to raise to now address the next tranche of capital expenses and funding needs.
So just clarify for me, Fred, I'm sorry. So in 2030, the 4% that we're adding in 2025 doesn't just go away and we're back to normal and the debt is being paid and we're moving through life toward paying this debt off for this 36-inch water line. I'm specifically talking about it. We're gonna have to revisit this in 2030 and retain the 4% or make an adjustment, but there's gonna be some money that's gonna be part of everybody's water bill that is gonna be paying for this debt beyond 2030.
Yes.
Even though we retire some other debt and resources may become available to offset the cost of this debt, we're gonna have to encumber or we're gonna have to plan for monies from water use or water rates to pay for this debt, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, it's accounted for now, right? So we're building this into the 5-year planning horizon. So we're trying to adjust rates now to account for those increases. But again, we don't look, our crystal ball is really fuzzy after 5 years. I mean, we typically say, let's look at a 5-year rate setting horizon and evaluate those rates within that context and relative to the assumptions in the model. So really what I'm saying is I just want to be careful that if we say, let's pull all of that increase up front, we're really saying, let's pull up the next 5 years, pull forward the next 5 years of rate increases up front, and still monitor that every year. It doesn't absolve us from monitoring these enterprise funds and looking at this and make sure we're adjusting for changes to those assumptions. But hopefully, if you do that, you say, okay, we did it all up front, and all things, if we predicted everything accurately, then we don't have to take as substantial action in future years. So instead of 7%, maybe it's just that inflationary increase every year. But I wouldn't hang my hat on that for the next 10 years or 15 years. I mean, it's anybody's guess what happens, down the road relative to changes in cost. And so some entities think, I guess, as they try to make these decisions, that if you do it all now, then you can just put that to bed for the next 20 years. Well, that just does not work. So
it seems like the concern that I would have is if we load next year's bill by 17%, you got people going, I'm gonna have to conserve a lot. And we're not gonna sell as much water so that they can keep their rate down where it was. And we haven't done ourselves any good because we haven't raised any more money. We've just sold less water.
And that is the exact situation that many entities experienced the last couple of years. That as we had less water and drought policies were put in place, we had many meetings with water districts and entities regarding lost revenue relative to conservation and budget shortfalls. So you're right, it's a double-edged sword, and there is some price elasticity relative to water rates and water use. So as you increase those rates, usage goes down, not one-to-one ratio there, but that does decrease. And so it is a double-edged sword.
Well, we've already seen people just completely wiping out their front lawn, turning it into rocks. And, it's against the ordinance, but that didn't stop, in order to try to do that. Pardon?
It's not cheap either.
Oh, no.
Rocks
And,
are expensive.
I think this lawn flipping deal and the flip the strip thing that we're doing, all those things I think are good. They do cost you though, because you sell much water. But I would fear if we said, okay, yeah, we're gonna jack that thing up 17% in 1 year, we'd have an exponential shift in that.
But we're just talking about base rate here, right?
No, this is overall.
This is a percentage that affects all tiers.
Yes.
Okay.
So it affects base and usage.
So what does a blended model look like? Instead of 17% the first year, you maybe do 8 and then, 1 or 2 the next 4 years.
I gotta find out. I don't understand what the motivation to do that. I mean, you guys are asking this question, but I don't see why you would do that.
To get
They like rip the band.
just because it costs less over time. If you front load it, you're gonna spend less over time.
Well, yeah, I understand that.
So
But to Fred's point, different people are paying the rate. If you put it all up front here and you haven't had to spend the money yet, you're just trying to save it, then these people are paying the money. And then they're gonna move, some people are gonna move out and new people are gonna move in. They're gonna take advantage of that.
So there's another
That'll
element
save
to
money.
think about, which is need. So I usually see when an entity wants to upfront that rate increase, there's a substantial need upfront, and you see a huge investment that's required. So instead of pushing out that capital investment, or if it's operational in nature, they keep that to maintain their level of service and increase rates in year 1 or 2 to match that expense. So when we look at pro formas, if we see some of that, like some substantial capital investment, you have that in this case where there's $100 million of capital investment happening. But again, that's been amortized over a longer period of time. And we're trying to equalize these expenses, which lends itself more towards annual increases to say, okay, let's do something every year to stay ahead of the game and watch the model every year to make sure that we're hitting our targets. Some entities will hone in on that if if those costs are more equalized. Again, if our capital improvement, if we go down to your CIP, we're trying to equalize that through bonding and the structuring of those projects so that it's a more flatlined CIP investment curve, not a roller coaster of investment, which would require maybe some different tools to utilize. Again, the trade-off of that, though, is it does result in potentially higher rates in the long term. But it does, again, approach that as it offers you as a council and future legislative bodies to make those decisions, to say, yes, we're comfortable with this rate increase, versus doing it all up front. It's now set in stone. It's a little harder to maybe go back and claw that back, right? And say, hey, we didn't really want to do that.
Brad, do you know how our utility bills, particularly water, rates against our neighboring sister cities?
I
just wonder how much more we have, our rates are than North Ogden are.
Yeah, you're higher. So when I looked at some comps, I pulled Salt Lake City. Well, these aren't necessarily neighbors. Some of them are neighbors, but Salt Lake City, Provo, Orem, Granger Hunter, South Jordan, Riverdale, Clearfield, South Ogden, Bonavista Vista Water. You're higher, yeah. So when we were going through some of the discussions with the state, we focused in on that, say, hey, our bills are higher. When we look at that summer month or the annual assumption relative to a water bill, that was part of our dialogue, to say, hey, we need some additional help here because our bills are higher. But the challenge with that is when we look at affordability, some of the metrics that the state utilizes for affordable water bills, you still have some capacity. Even with the proposed increases, you stay below their affordability threshold, meaning there's still some room to raise rates before you hit that affordability metric, which is why the state didn't provide grants. It's low interest loans. You still have some bandwidth there relative to rate increases. So it's a challenging element to show, hey, we're higher than our comps, but relative to this affordability target, we're okay. What it really reflects is water is really across the state hasn't become as costly maybe as it should as we get into.
True, everywhere, yeah. Well, one thing I was gonna say too, in relation to a comment that Linda made too, but I've heard from constituents as well. And when you go out knocking doors too, you notice that we do have a large elderly population, and so putting the rate higher up front, I'm just worried that it would impact them a little bit more negatively because they may not be around in 5 years.
I can hear it now.
Yeah.
I can sure.
Not that I'm saying I wish them ill, but.
So I had calculated a projected water bill. Your water bill is actually on average about $40. Your combined, I believe your combined utility bill, which includes refuse, sewer, storm, and water, is around $110 for the average residential customer. So when I looked at affordability, even with the proposed increases, if I put it back to our 4% annually for the next through 2030, we were at about 90% of the affordable bill. So when we projected that forward, you got close. We're getting to about that affordability threshold, but it was still below the target amount.
But on an average of 100, let's say an average of 110, I don't know if your model can do that. We did this before. What's the total increase? And I know it doesn't by the year.
Yeah, it gets up to like $55
for the year
by 20. Well, that's 2028. Sorry. So by 2028, I didn't go beyond for the purpose of the state data that we were providing. So in 2028, we were at about 90%. So it went from $40 to $55 on average. And the affordable threshold is about 61. And I kept that constant actually. So I played around with some of the numbers to try to help our hope. Help our cause.
Can I just see if I understand that correctly? So from 25 to 28, well, it's 3 years, it went from 40 to 55, is that what you
Yeah.
said?
Yeah.
So about $5 a year?
Yeah, I mean, we're going, the difference. Yeah, I mean, a total increase of $13 if you're going from 55 to 42, from 42 to 55.
Okay.
But, are you just saying, what is that each year? That's per month.
per month.
That's per month, okay, that's,
Sorry.
okay,
Yeah, that's per month.
okay.
It's on your monthly bill, yeah.
Okay. So a $15 increase by 2028 on an average monthly water bill, and that's just the water side of it.
Because it's base and use.
Yeah, that's the kind of total monthly bill for a residential customer. That data is 2023 data, so that'll fluctuate, give it, in any given year, but. So again, going back to the model itself, again, we have that flexibility to change the how we infuse revenues into this equation. But there will be trade-offs with either of these scenarios.
One more question about this. How could we get a little bit closer to the 365? Is there like a 1% or half percentage or something?
So
It's like, why do we need to be that
this is
far
where
above it?
maybe Lisa can chime in, but I know in the past, we've projected what that looks like, but the actual decision-making happens on an annual basis to say, okay, what are we gonna do with rates this year? Or if you adopt 2 years of rate policy, then you say, okay, we're still going to evaluate this to say, what does this look like and what are we comfortable adopting? So I don't think the policy is to adopt rates through 2030.
Yeah.
Just so
We're
we
just
can
showing,
pick, yeah.
showing what does it look like right now, but you're going to be taking action every year, right? To say,
Well, not if the ordinance says we're just gonna.
oh, yes, exactly,
Actually, right.
relative to the inflation.
Right.
So your inflation,
Yeah.
is set in
Well, I mean,
ordinance.
we haven't taken a vote, the council hasn't voted on water rates for.
But that's just because you've adopted the
Years.
inflation,
Yeah,
correct?
not since I've been here, yeah.
This
You're at
ordinance does
10.
have 5 years of
5 years.
4%.
Oh,
It's in
okay.
there automatically.
Okay.
So the 4%, so this next year we calculated the 3.18
Yes.
and the 4% and set a rate. And then we did 4%, it's a defined amount each year for the next 4 years after that.
That's rate increase plus the
And then
inflationary
the inflation would be
adjustment.
on top of
Okay.
the defined 4% dollar amount.
So
Or even compounding that.
Well, we're not
Or just
compounding
adding
it,
it.
it would be
Yes.
on, we're defining the 4%.
Yeah, because the 3% in the model, we have that assumption, which is the 4% plus a 3% inflationary number. But the inflationary percentage is calculated each year based on the two indices. So that may be higher or lower depending on what that looks like. So historically, you had higher than 3% based on those variables, whereas the proposed for this next fiscal year is close to that 3% because the inflation indices have dropped. Inflation has gone down. So there are two different, those are two different variables that are being adjusted.
That was sort of my question is on, we had 2 years of sort of outlier inflation data, which, and rates are still persisting. And so, what if we see another 2 years or the next 4 years, we see a few 6% in there? How does that, it's going to, cash reserves aren't going to be necessarily affected because we're just going to follow that model, but the rates are definitely going to be impacted.
Yeah, I think the thought behind the formula-driven inflation adjustment is that while your rates will go up, so will your costs. So your capital
Sure.
costs will
Yeah.
increase substantially, which is what you've been dealing with in subsequent previous years is rising in capital costs. In addition, your O&M expense will also increase based on those inflation indices. And so Ogden has been very proactive. So of the communities that I work with, you are probably one of the most proactive communities relative to evaluating your need. a lot of entities will wait and absorb that capital change or inflationary change in increments. So that they say, okay, we're gonna deal with that and try to adjust our budget model and increase rates, which requires higher percentages, and then sit on it, and then do that again, and then sit on it. And so it's a little bit more of that roller coaster, whereas.
Probably
you-
off election years.
Yes, where you guys look at it frequently and discuss it often and address issues before they happen. So it's a very proactive, I think, positive approach. So you stay ahead of those issues now rather than waiting for them to happen to you.
Do you have a feel for what 4% will do to demand? In other words, if demand drops off and our revenue is negatively impacted, do we have a feel for whether 4% is negligible or if it will impact demand and lower revenue?
I don't know the answer to that. I can speak to, again, what I've seen relative to other entities and the issues they've faced in recent years. And it's more the weather and drought conditions that influence that revenue stream versus rate changes. Most, you see continued use of a water system regardless of these types of rate increases. Now, if you did a substantial rate increase, that may be different, but it's more Mother Nature and what sort of drought policies you have in place to promote conservation that will change it. I haven't even turned on my sprinkling system, we've got so much rain coming down. That's going to influence how much water I'm
Those
using
rain
this year.
barrels.
All those rain barrels.
I'm kidding.
It's great, it hasn't rained in my garage yet this season.
So the ordinance we have is 4% per year for 5 years. This comes before us June 18th, right? For as a public hearing and action. So if we want to adjust off of anything, we need to do this before the 18th, right?
Are we
We
having the
noticed
public
up to
hearing
8%.
separately, or is they're in the same meeting?
Oh, the public hearing?
Yeah.
I think we have public hearing and action in the same meeting, don't we? Or was it a week after? Stay.
So we have the utility transfers public hearing that night, but no action. So were you thinking the action on that night? I don't have it on the calendar. I don't think the actual action on utility rates.
Yeah, so typically what we do is any fees that go with the budget, we'll do with the budget on
Oh,
the same
okay.
day.
Oh, there it is.
So yeah, technically it would come under the fee. So you've got the discount that we talked about earlier, plus the fire fee that we haven't seen that yet, but we're anticipating that change. So what we've done in the past is have all of those fees kind of together on the agenda with the budget. So yeah, there's a lot of actions on the 18th proposed. And that's typically how we've done it, but we can carry on so
Yeah.
And that's the passing, like the tentative budget, since we're gonna we may consider a tax increase.
Right, that's the plan right now. So you would have a tentative budget public hearing that most likely would be continued from the June 4th. And then the salary schedules we're still working on, the fees, the enterprise fund transfers, all of those would be on there. I think the problem with having all the public hearings and then waiting a week is that we've got that primary election the next week. Then we have to have things set by June 30th. So we're kind of tied on that last Tuesday.
Sometimes constituents feel upset.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to give us feedback and then we make a decision 10 minutes
Yeah.
later. That's the thing I was thinking about.
We usually try.
I was gonna say, we should try to separate them.
Yeah. So, but before we get to the 18th, I guess we need to come to a consensus on how we feel about the 4% versus, we noticed up to 8%, right? Yeah,
But it's gonna be this 4 plus the 3, right?
4 plus the assumed.
Plus,
yeah.
But the three's already
It's already done.
in, so.
Yeah.
To that cake. I actually like the the 4%. It's measured. It's, I think it puts the rate at the right place. Even though it's a little more down the road. I still think though that we're not just talking about the 36-inch water line. We're talking about maintaining the whole infrastructure. And, you know, our ordinance, I think, says we're supposed to do 2% of the pipe every year. And we haven't really been. So, it wouldn't hurt us to have a little extra money somewhere along the way. So.
I do want to point out one more thing. Just as you were talking about where we're a little bit above the 365 versus below. This model also assumes that you have a higher growth rate for the next 5 years as well, relative to the number of connections that come on. So there is a little bit of risk in the model relative to that, that if that doesn't happen, then you would fall below this target. So you're going back to that cushion, having it up slightly above that 365 helps in the event of no growth.
Well, and I'm not trying to be frivolous.
No.
I'm saying, how can we save people a little money?
Yes. I just wanted to point it out, if something, in 2 years, if I'm back in front of you saying, wait, we're a little low, that could be one of the reasons, is if growth goes away and it doesn't happen, then we would get less than what we're showing here. It's not a huge impact, but that is built into this. So we wanted to try to give the model some benefit of that projected growth and connections. So that the rate wasn't higher than what we're projecting here.
I do have one more question for everybody in the room that, do we know at this point in time how much water flows through our system and into our commercial and residential uses in gallons?
I can tell you 1 million gallons a day. So right now, we're probably about 14 million gallons a day.
14 million a day.
Yeah, and it's gonna jump up significantly in a month. Like
As we start watering. Okay, thank you, Justin. And so if this whole pipeline project is about saving anywhere from 1 million gallons a day to more than that, when we're calling for more water, and you all correct me, but I've heard somebody say maybe 1 billion gallons a year. Water is something of value, so the conservation of this water with this new pipeline, there's a value there. Are we accounting for that anywhere in our equation around this project and water rates and debt?
Water conserved, it's not water saved.
I think it does in the long term, in that your capital improvement plan is adjusted to account for that new demand curve. So when you have your master plan done, as you improve the infrastructure, it changes your ratios per unit. You know, how much water is being pulled through the system per equivalent residential connection. And I know when we were talking about the master plan, those demand curves were adjusted to account for some of these elements. So what, if we do this, we're going to save, and now we don't have to build future infrastructure to build to that kind of wasteful demand curve, right? We get to capitalize on the tail, or utilize that savings on the tail end with less infrastructure investment. So that's one of the challenges with this is it's difficult to say, you know, how are we saving money right now? Because you actually have to spend money to build this infrastructure. That savings happens as you seal up the system and you don't have to build additional infrastructure to handle growth and changing demand. So
Or the cost of a catastrophic thing that could happen.
If there's pipeline, means the 24-inch pipeline.
No, I mean,
makes
I'm
the
just
river
trying
level
to
go down.
mention, yeah.
Devil's advocate.
So if
What did you?
you say like 500 billion gallons of water a year, let's put it in a tank. So create in your mind this tank that's got 500 million gallons of water, and somebody calls and says, we're short water out here in this little town. We'd like to buy your water. What's it worth?
So the tank is actually in the ground, right?
Oh, there is a
That's our
tank.
That's our aquifer, right? So
Okay.
instead of taking them out of the ground, and to what Fred said, we can't count our chickens before they hatch. So to just assume that they're there right now, let's get the project done, realize the savings. I believe there is going to be a large amount of water savings. And I've said for a long time that all conservation is great, but there's not a conservation plan that can match replacing our water system. And so once we get that, then we get opportunities, once we get businesses or other things to come in, that then we can say, we've got the water for your business, or we could sell it, you know, but then we'd have that choice to be able to do that. But right now, what we would save really is the power cost of pumping that water out of the aquifer.
Okay.
And the question in addition, you said, we'll get a tank that's our aquifer, and then other people want it, we can sell it, what's the value? That value, that question you just asked was the basis of our request to the state.
Right, exactly. So we got value for that
So
in
we're
return.
asking for the money up front, put
Right.
it into this, so we save over the long term of the amortization. We're putting our savings to work now instead of waiting for the savings and then hoping for the request, which doesn't exist. And in that case, it would require distribution to deliver for other districts, and other areas that we don't already have. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So great question. That was the absolute.
Yeah, because you found value in negotiating with the state for $10 million. Yeah, okay.
Any other questions on the model?
Polish up your crystal ball, because
Yeah.
that's the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good deal. Okay.
I will say, I mean, we've heard from the police and fire tonight, and when we keep trying to like get ahead, right? Like, how do we get ahead? And that's all I was thinking with this is, in my opinion, this is one area where we can kind of get ahead, or we can kind of get in front of things. And that was my point, was if we can, instead of doing 4%, we do 6% and do that. Because like it was mentioned, I mean, and I'm not discrediting, we can do the 4 and I'm fine with the 4 and I'm great. But if we can get, like I said, if we can move to 6 or whatever it is, whatever number we decide on, and capture a little bit more on the front end, we definitely have water project needs, and we're always gonna need the money. So it's, that's what I was thinking. And that's why I was curious about how much it is per year, if we go from 4% to 5% or 4% to 8%, whatever it is. I mean, if it's, and again, I'm not trying to say, well, I want to suck every penny we can out of our residents. I'm not. I'm just saying, if we can find that balance, say, you know, instead of $12 a month, it's $14 a month, or, you know, whatever it is, or instead of $8 a month, it's $9 a month, whatever that is. It's just, in this case, unlike trying to find money for all other departments, in this case, a little bit really does add up throughout the whole city. And so that's my logic. I'm not proposing we do 17% or jumping under the 20. I just thought if we could do a little more upfront, it does benefit us I think it benefits us a lot more on the back end. So, but I'm good with whatever.
Yeah.
That's just my argument.
I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah.
I've had with him.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll definitely, yeah, thank you, Fred.
Thanks, Fred.
Thank you.
Fred?
All right, any other council business or comments? If not, we are adjourned.
Wow.
Have a good night.